Hey guys, it's Villain Theory, and I don't know, 18, 20 months ago, I said I was going to cover all the aggression archetypes. And now we're here. So in this video, I'm going over every archetype in every aspect. Now there is no official list of all the archetypes in the game. There's nothing that the community generally agrees on, although there are obviously a lot that the community does agree on. But really, this is my personal list of what I think the archetypes are. There are going to be a lot of them. I don't think it is a stretch to say this is the most archetypes covered in any video on YouTube in Marvel Champions. I don't think any of the other ones come close. Even the archetypes individually are going to be full of different things you can do with those cards. Before we get into the good stuff, I do need to talk about what actually is an archetype, because that word is going to mean something different to different people. In this context, I'm looking at it in terms of decks in Marvel Champions. So according to Google, an archetype is a deck strategy characterized by a specific combination of cards and related effects / synergies. To translate that a bit into English and my kind of interpretation, I'm going to say that's a deck with cards which work well together, interact mechanically, and the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So if I play a card and I've got another card that complements it, the overall effect is going to be greater than what they could do individually. They're going to kind of interact and talk to each other in some way, and it's going to kind of form a cohesive game plan and style that separates itself from playing in a different way. Now, since this game is over 5 years old with pretty regular releases, there is a lot going on. So we're going to start with what I'm calling umbrella archetypes, and those are going to be sort of archetypes which contain smaller archetypes, which we'll call sub-archetypes. But even a sub-archetype can have several ways to approach it, differences which are very, very notable and can affect a lot of the cards in the deck, which I'm just going to call variants. Now, I'm not going to worry about these terms too much throughout the video, because I think the line kind of blurs between what is what, but just be aware that if something seems to be derived from something else, yeah, it's probably a sub-archetype. Most archetypes are formed by a few of these kind of archetype trees, but then there'll be a few archetypes which live on their own, and then a few things which are not full archetypes, but nonetheless a collection of cards, maybe just a few, that won't form a full deck, but will be very helpful when used together. I'm going to call those side synergies. And generally, you might use this to fill in a gap if your main archetype has some kind of weakness, or perhaps you don't need to add any more cards to sufficiently kind of execute your plan with that archetype, and you just need to add in something else. So why not add in something else that complements itself and is also very good? Now we can get into it. Starting in aggression, I think the three main umbrella archetypes are attack events, which I think is self-explanatory. They consist of playing a lot of attack events. Basic attack, which again, you're going to focus on your basic attack stat and maybe ready up and attack again. Then we've got ally attacks, which, surprise, surprise, is attacking with allies, but you can attack with a variety of allies in different ways, and so on and so forth, for all these different quote-unquote umbrella archetypes. Starting with attack events, we have what I'm calling plain events. Now, this isn't a true archetype in the truest sense, in my opinion. This is kind of the, I've got the core set and one aggression hero pack, and I don't have enough stuff to form a really detailed deck plan, but I can start to add in a combination of different attacks which are individually good, and that's going to be what my focus is going forward. If your character has the right traits, you might have access to other attacks, such as aerial characters having pitchback and dive bomb, and silent characters having psychic assault and cybo attack, as well as their respective resource cards. What we really need to talk about with attack events is honed technique, which is a very strong, very famous way to play, and the namesake upgrade comes in Nova's hero pack. This is a free cost card which requires 2 mental resources to put into play, and then once it's in play, when you play an aggression attack event and you pay for that with a mental resource, you get to increase the damage of that attack event by the cost of the card. So if I play Clobber, a 2-cost event which normally does 3 damage, it becomes 5 damage. Now this is a really, really good increase, and I love using Clobber for this because it comes back to your hand, so it kind of refunds itself a little bit. Very, very good. Melee goes from dealing 3 damage and 3 damage. Thanks to Hone Technique, it's now going to deal 6 damage and 6 damage, which is very, very nice. Both instances of damage get increased by Hone Technique, which we really, really like. So there's some fun combinations here, and generally it's very powerful. Typically, the damage increase here is often said to be too much for solo play, a little bit excessive. I don't know that I entirely agree with that. I definitely think it's a lot better in multiplayer, but if you get Hone Technique in the first couple of turns, it can really change the entire course of your solo game, and definitely any multiplayer games, just because the damage is so good. For my money, I'm usually running at least 2, sometimes 3, but definitely at least 2 Hone Techniques. This is because the sooner you get it, the sooner all your events are going to start popping off with bigger damage, but also it has a mental requirement. So if you don't have 2 mentals in hand, along with Hone Technique, you can't play it when you find it. Having 2 in there gives you a bit more flexibility in, oh, I didn't have the right resources this time, but when it comes up again in this deck pass, I'll be able to play it then. We can even spend Hone Technique on the other Hone Technique if you draw them together, no big deal. And then as a mental resource in rotation in your deck, the spare Hone Technique will then be able to pay towards your events to make sure they trigger the damage bonus. Generally, when I'm running Hone Technique, I want at least a minimum of 6 attacks, because you don't want to play a 3-cost upgrade with a requirement and then not benefit from it for a couple of turns, but I'm very happy if I can even have 10 or more attacks. A variant of Hone Technique is honed 50 cards, I'm just going to call it, where you go up to the maximum deck size of 50 cards as opposed to the traditionally desirable 40 cards. And this is because we're focusing here on no quarter. When you defeat enemies with no quarter, for each point of excess damage dealt to the enemy, you get to discard cards from your deck. Each one of them that is red, an aggression card, you get to add to your hand. So if you increase your deck to 50 cards and you fill it with mostly red aggression cards, the percentage of red cards in your deck is much higher. No quarter is going to start drawing you more and more cards on average, and effectively every time you use no quarter, you're going to end up with a lot of red cards in hand, and it's going to be very, very efficient. You can even use no quarter to draw another no quarter to start another chain of card draw again, which is really fun. The only problem is you normally need a minion on the board to trigger the excess damage. This means in solo play it's at its least reliable, and in multiplayer it's at its most reliable. And obviously scenarios which have more minions than average are going to be good for this, and also cards which let you summon minions in, which we're going to talk about later. And of course we very famously have the aerial Hone Technique builds, which basically use Dive Bomb, which gets its damage increased by 4, but it doesn't just increase its initial damage of 7 by 4, it's also the second sentence. The Dive Bomb ends up dealing 11 damage and then 5 damage to everything else. This is the board clearing combo. It's extraordinarily powerful, particularly at 4-player, and not a lot compares to this. We also, of course, then have Psionic Hone Technique. The Psionic characters are very good at spending mental resources, as well as having their own resource, Power of the Mind, be a mental resource that can pay toward these Psionic attack cards, which is really, really good. We then have what I'm calling multi-target attacks, and we already talked about melee getting both of its damage instances increased by Hone Technique, but it's also the case if you increase its damage with Aggressive Energy and Warrior Skill. So you can run melee without Hone Technique, or you can run Hone Technique and melee along with Aggressive Energy and Warrior Skill, particularly because of the Wild Resource icon and Mental Resource icons respectively. If I'm running melee and 1x1, another attack which can hit multiple enemies, multiple targets, and I'm not running Hone Technique, it's probably because my hero has its own multi-target attack that way, and that's going to give me the consistency I really want. And again, because these attacks want multiple targets, we're again looking for frequent minions, so we're looking at multiplayer, minion summoning, or very minion-heavy scenarios. Next up for attack events, we have weapon attacks. So Fusillade, which I'm probably saying wrong, has been around for a long time. 2-cost event, exhaust a weapon upgrade you control to deal 5 damage to an enemy. New upcoming card, Firepower, also wants you to exhaust weapons to deal damage. The best targets for these are weapons which don't need to exhaust to do something useful. Yarnborn is the classic example of this, but a few heroes have their own, such as Black Panther T'Challa with their Panther Claws. So you can exhaust those weapons with no consequences and get all this really juicy damage. There's also the new S.H.I.E.L.D sidearm coming with Firepower, which does want to exhaust to use it, but it is such a small kind of gain when you use it, you don't typically mind, in my opinion, waiting a second, using Firepower to get bigger damage, and then you can just exhaust the sidearm on a turn where you don't get Firepower. There is some argument as well, you can use these to kind of preserve counters on things like hand cannon and so on and so forth, but to me that can be useful, but it's not really ideal and something I would build toward. It's something that situationally in that moment could be handy. And although I think it's a big ask to bring multiple weapons and Firepower and have enough mental resources for Hone Technique, if you did play Firepower with a mental resource with Hone Technique on your board, all those instances of damage, because it can deal 3, 3, and 3 damage, they're going to become 4, 4, and 4 damage, which is an increase of 3 damage, which is quite nice. Just a quick mention to Test the Defense as well. This is an upgrade that each time you play an attack event, it gets a counter. When it has enough counters, it basically does an extra attack for you. So the smaller attacks played quicker are going to get you that damage faster. So this isn't super popular, but I think it's kind of fun and I wanted to mention it. Up next, we have basic attack builds, and combat training is kind of the classic card for this. You want to play this on a hero that is going to be using their basic attack basically every turn. Now for basic attack, it's not just enough to have a high attack stat. You're going to want to ready up to use that attack stat multiple times ideally, and then combat training can boost that up. Skilled Strike is nice to kind of get a little bit extra basic attack damage in there, because you're basic attacking most turns, it should always be usable to some extent. Blood Rage is a nice way to draw cards from defeating people with your basic attack, and then Battle Fury can ready you up to deal it again. Because of the nature of Blood Rage and Battle Fury, they're a little bit better in multiplayer, but be aware that Skilled Strike can start to deal excess wasted damage. That's where Hand Cannon gets really good. I'm generally bringing 2 of these at least in all my basic attack builds, but it will depend on the character and what other weapons they're bringing because of the restricted keyword. Mean Swing is one of the bigger sub-archetypes for this, which is a little bit like the weapon kind of stuff we already looked at. You want to exhaust a weapon to get a bonus, but this time it's adding it onto your basic attack. So it's conditional on basic attacking and having a weapon that you're happy to exhaust. Again, Yarnborn, generally the poster child for this, but you can use this with Thor and your hammer, or again, Black Panther and his claws, things like that. Make this a really, really good card. But generally, unless I'm playing a character that already comes with a good weapon for it, I'm probably not running it. We can also use a lot of the faction cards to ready up in Marvel Champions, and these could really be 4 or at least 3 archetypes of their own here. C.I.T.T. in the Guardians, you don't need anything else, you just need to play that card and then pay its costs to trigger its action. That's going to ready your character up, so you can basic attack again. With these other cards here, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and Utopia, generally you're going to want a few matching allies to get the best out of these, but they are really good. Earth's Mightiest Heroes, I probably want 4 to 5 Avengers in the deck at least, just so I have some consistent way to get somebody into play that I can then exhaust, to then ready up my hero, who would be an Avenger in this case, to then get their basic attack damage again. Spider-Man Peter Parker technically doesn't need any other Web Warriors, but Across the Spider-Verse is a really good way to get him into play. But if you draw that card and Spider-Man Peter Parker is not in your discard pile, it's not really any good. You're going to want Web of Life and Destiny to exhaust for it, and you might want a couple of other Spider allies to have in your discard pile, just in case you draw it without Peter Parker there. And at that point, you might as well just try and get all the benefit from Web of Life and Destiny that you can. More on that card a little bit later. And then we've got Utopia, which can ready an X-Men hero, but you need to play an X-Men ally. So I'm probably looking for 6 to 10 X-Men allies to make sure I can ready up from this almost every turn that I have Utopia in play, to keep getting more basic attack damage from my hero. Next up, we have ally attacks, and Boot Camp is really the poster child for this whole archetype, this whole kind of style. Boot Camp is a free cost support, which says each ally you control gets +1 attack. Pretty straightforward. Once this is in play, any ally you have is just going to be able to deal a good bit more damage. The more health they have, the more they're getting benefits from this. We then have War Room, which is a 1-cost support, which can let you remove threat from a scheme if you have an ally that defeats a minion. This is a little bit slow and low impact, but I do like the card. But really, you just need Boot Camp and a whole bunch of allies. You can have kind of generic Boot Camp, which we're looking at here, which is just good allies from any kind of traits, and you can get pretty good results from that. It occurs to me just now, talking about aggression this long, if you're playing in solo play, Thwarting can be something that aggression struggles with more than other aspects struggle with aggression specialty, which is dealing damage. So if you're playing solo and you want to make any of these archetypes work, you might consider putting a few allies in with 2 Thwarting, just to make sure your threat removal is covered. But it's up to you. It will definitely make things easier. I'm thinking things like Nick Fury Senior, Deadpool. These are just some generic options that any deck can really run, including kind of generic ally boot camps, to make sure you don't lose to threat. So moving on from generic kind of plain ally boot camp, we've got Avengers boot camp. With Avengers Tower, lets us get allies in for cheaper, lets us have an extra one out. It's not so good for Wasp because you can't discount 0, but she's a really good ally, and there are plenty of Avenger allies which you can discount. And yeah, you're playing an Avenger hero, you're playing Avenger allies, and they're dealing more damage. Something to note here is that this doesn't synergize with Earth's Mightiest Heroes very well, even though you might think it does, because yes, that card wants allies of the Avenger trait to exhaust to ready your hero, but why would you boost the damage of your allies and then exhaust them? It kind of is a weird kind of tempo here, so I don't typically recommend that combo. We've also got Guardians Boot Camp, and they've got Nowhere, a bit like Avengers Tower, increases the ally limit, but this time when you play a Guardian ally, you get to draw a card instead of discounting the ally beforehand. It's kind of interesting. But more than that, Guardians have A, well, really good allies, which we're going to cover, but B, Energy Spear, which is a 1-cost upgrade, which increases the ally's attack by another 2, and it gains piercing. So that's really, really good for Guardian allies. Bug can heal himself, but there are a lot of really good Guardian allies, and that's where First Aid starts to get good. If you have Rocket on the board with Boot Camp and an Energy Spear, when he attacks a minion, he's dealing 7 damage. That's crazy. And 7 damage per attack is absolutely worth healing with First Aid. We've then got Web Warriors Boot Camp, which I don't think is talked about much, but now we have an actual aggression Web Warrior, which makes it a little bit more fun. And you can even just recur Penny Parker every turn for some easy kind of triggers of Spider-Woman Jessica Drew. She kind of rewards you with damage when you play a Web Warrior, and Penny Parker always comes back to your hand to play again. And of course, we've got X-Men Bootcamp. We've already talked about Utopia. If you're playing a lot of allies to ready yourself, you're going to have a lot of allies that will benefit from Bootcamp. But the X-Men are kind of tricky. We can do different things with the X-Men and attacking with allies. I should also mention the Team Strike card, because I know people are going to mention it. For me, I don't love this card because yes, by exhausting your allies and dealing damage kind of equal to their attack stat, you're effectively dodging consequential damage. But with Utopia, you want to keep playing new allies, so prolonging the ones you have isn't always super desirable. It also kind of effectively locks your hero into basic attacking when you might not necessarily want that depending on the situation. But we can do other things with X-Men and ally attacking. We have attack training. This is a 1-cost upgrade, which gives the attached ally 1+ attack, kind of like Bootcamp, but also +2 hit points, which is extremely good because then we can do that boosted damage again and again. We can then game time to ready them up to get it again for really cheap. It's really efficient and very, very strong. You can run attack training with Bootcamp, but you can also skip Bootcamp, or maybe if Bootcamp comes up and you can't play it, not such a big deal. Bootcamp is really good, but its weakness is that it's a 3-cost support, which doesn't do anything unless you've already got allies out to take advantage of it, so it's a bit of a tempo hit. Attack training being 1-cost is a lot easier, and yes, it's only affecting one ally, but by giving that one ally +2 hit points, let's just say if you play it on an ally with 2 attack and 3 hit points, it's going to give you generally at least 8 extra damage, which is extremely, extremely efficient. And of course, we're still playing allies, we're still probably going to take Utopia, even if we're not readying quite as much because the allies are lasting a bit longer, although often we still are readying just as much. The increased ally limit is still really useful here, and the best ally for it, in my opinion, is Gold Balls, because using his interrupt, he can get up to 4 attack, 5 with attack training, 6 with bootcamp, then you can ready him with game time, and the villain falls over. The X-Men kind of attack training stuff has some extra considerations. It's a bit more complicated than usual. You also have the options of Danger Room and X-Mansion. Typically, I'm just running one of these, but sometimes I don't run any. It depends how much I'm going Alter Ego. If I'm in multiplayer, is there anyone else at the table playing a mutant character that can also benefit from them? Those kind of things add a lot of value. Otherwise, it can be a lot of work. I got to get Danger Room down, X-Mansion down, Bootcamp down. Then I play an ally, and then it's kind of come together. But it's going to take a few turns for all of that to pay off. It's just a lot of setup, and sometimes you don't need it. Also want to shout out Hope Summers quickly, who gains the trait on your identity. So if you play Hope Summers on an X-Men traded hero in hero form, she gains the X-Men trait, she'll trigger Utopia. If you do this on a Web Warrior character, when she leaves play, I believe she triggers Web of Life and Destiny. She's very flexible. You do need to have superpower cards on your hero, but just a little shout out as somebody interesting. Last for ally attack, we have a quick shout out to the Asgardians, usually ran by Valkyrie, mainly 4, sometimes Rogue if you're going weird with it. But effectively, you'll play the Bifrost. It's a 1-cost support. You exhaust it, search your deck for an Asgard ally, and play it, paying its cost. Shuffle your deck. On someone like Angela, who's 0 cost, that's really easy. Oh, brings in a minion. 4 suddenly draws cards. Outside of the 3 main umbrella archetypes, we're going to have a couple of what I'm calling hybrid builds. Starting with Fluid Motion, this is a 1-cost upgrade that gets you +1 attack on your hero. Immediately, you might be thinking, oh, this is for readying kind of basic attack builds. But you have to play an attack event to trigger it. So now it's also kind of in the attack event category. Generally, cheap events that you can play around anything you want to ready are going to be really good. So you can play the attack events, boost up your stats, then basic attack, ready, basic attack. It doesn't suit every hero that well, but the ones it does work for, it's really, really fun. And we've kind of already covered it a little bit here, but we've got Utopia attack build. So if you've got Utopia, you're playing a lot of X-Men to trigger it a lot. And since you're getting readied a lot in that case, you might as well boost up your stats, boost up your attack because we're on aggression here. But where this starts to differ from attacking with allies, we can run Utopia to ready ourselves up, have our hero be the main vessel of damage, and lean into some of the X-Men allies like Beak, Professor X, White Queen, Shadowcat, that are better at thwarting, cover our thwart, especially for solo aggression, because you need the thwarting help, and it works really well. Outside of the main archetypes, we've got what I'm elegantly calling other stuff, and we're starting with excess damage. These things can be little archetypes of their own, or maybe side synergies, kind of tools to help the other things, but just sets of cards which go together and I think are helpful to talk about together. Excess damage, I think, is pretty straightforward. If you deal more damage than you need to defeat a minion, that's going to be excess damage. If you can get overkill, such as with Hand Cannon or the Marked upgrade, that excess damage isn't wasted, it goes onto the villain, and that's really kind of convenient. Generally, if I'm running a basic attack build, like I said, I've always got Hand Cannon, but just having a Hand Cannon in a basic attack build doesn't make it an excess damage build. it just means you're going to waste less. If you start to build other cards into it that benefit from excess damage, then it's going to start to move toward that. A card like that, for example, would be Moment of Triumph. For each point of excess damage you deal, you get healed, so that's kind of a nice way to keep yourself alive. I just mentioned Marked, which is a 0-cost upgrade. Attacks against attached minion gain Overkill. This is really convenient to make sure you don't waste damage, but losing a card from hand, playing the attachment itself, generally just to make sure you don't waste anything, you could have probably just made a smaller attack, not worried about Marked, and it would just be a lot more efficient on all fronts, a lot more precise, but it is fun and you can do some really fun combos with it. We've then got Follow Through, which is a 2-cost upgrade. Some people love this, they'll put 3 in their decks, and it does allow for some really big, impressive combos. For each one of these on the board, you get to deal an extra 1 excess damage whenever you deal excess damage. So for something like Moment of Triumph or Hand Cannon, you're going to get that extra 1 healing or extra 1 damage, or both in combination, which is nice, but it doesn't do anything on its own, and you need the right kind of thing to do excess damage to get some kind of bonus from the excess damage. So typically I'm running 0 to 1 of these, but some people do love going for 3 of these. They do let some really big fun combos happen, so see how you like it. There's a bunch of other cards as well which benefit from excess damage, or can kind of enable excess damage to gain Overkill, like Full Body Charge if you've taken enough damage. Next up we have Minion Summoning. Some people call this like a full archetype, but for me this is a tool that's going to reward certain heroes or give certain other archetypes targets to use their stuff on, but it's kind of a means to an end rather than an end itself. Although I do really like the Bring It card, which gives you card draw for each minion engaged with you, but this can be a little bit hit or miss depending on the character and how much you're actually rewarded for summoning your minions, because the average character just Bring It is going to be a dead card as often as it's going to be card draw. Then we've got Hall of Heroes, which isn't really an archetype, it's not even a side synergy, it's just a single card, but I thought it was important to talk about in the general context of aggression. If you play Hall of Heroes, it doesn't do anything until you've defeated 3 minions, in which case you can go Alter Ego and you can get back the cards you basically used to pay for it in the first place. You need to trigger this twice to really actually benefit from it, and that means defeating 6 minions. In solo play, often a game can go by and you don't defeat 6 minions in the first place, especially in aggression where the games can go quickly. In multiplayer, Hall of Heroes gets better and better. In solo play, it's better taken against scenarios which are very minion heavy, or in decks where you will want to be summoning in extra minions, because you also have to note that you must go Alter Ego to get the card draw, and going Alter Ego is one of aggression's typical weaknesses. We also have minion upgrades, we already talked about Marked. There's also Gatekeeper, which I actually think is pretty decent value, but you do need to be able to defeat the minion when you play it, or you have to try and deal with Patrol, and it only targets their main scheme, so not a huge fan of it. But Suppressing Fire, which heals you when you defeat a minion, I actually like quite a lot. You're just going to need minions, which again makes it more consistent in multiplayer, which is something you're going to hear a lot in this video. There's also a couple of other cards which benefit from attacking minions with upgrades on them, but for my money I only like these on heroes which have a signature upgrade in their hero kit, which lets them put an upgrade out more on demand, because otherwise you're going to have to line up a minion, drawing an upgrade, and then drawing the attack to benefit from that upgrade, and afford both of those things, as well as anything else you actually need to do in the game. Next up, we have what I'm calling Punching Bag or Punch Bag, which is effectively being rewarded for taking hits. Toe-to-toe gets you attacked, then you get to deal 5 damage for 1 cost. Pretty nice, but you gotta get attacked, so that's kind of the downside. But if you have something like Counter Attack, that can get you bonus damage for your troubles, or you can just let the villain hit you normally, and then get to deal a lot of damage that way. This is pretty good for Rush. Unfortunately, it's not so good for targeting minions, but it is fun. Then we've got You'll Pay For That, which is actually a really nice, I would say underrated way to remove threat and aggression, but it typically rewards characters with higher hit points that can take these big attacks. Honestly, all 3 of these cards do, but they are very fun. We also have what I'm calling Bloodied, which is being at half, or rather under half hit points to get benefits from Now I'm Mad and Full Body Charge. This feels like an archetype that just needs 1 or 2 more cards to really take off, but nonetheless it is really fun to try and do this. It's just a little bit risky. If you're a 9 or 10 health hero, you're going to need to be at 4 or 5 hit points to actually start getting the special benefits from these cards, which is terrifying. But we do have cards like Blood Rage and Battle Fury, which damage you by 1, which lets you kind of fine-tune what damage you've taken to get in range for these. But typically, these reward the characters with more hit points because it's less risky to be under half your health. Hulk, for example, can get the benefits from Now I'm Mad and Full Body Charge, which are both physical resources for him, when he's at 8 hit points, rather than Quicksilver, who would have to be at 4. Next up, we have Stun Lock, which I put in quotation marks because aggression actually doesn't have that many ways to kind of realistically benefit from it. It's mostly just Dropkick and Mockingbird. But nonetheless, if your hero has stuns, you can build a very effective Stunlock deck with Dropkick and Mockingbird helping you out. Effectively, this is mostly a solo strategy where you stun the villain every turn, so the villain, every time they get to attack, they don't actually get to attack, and then you're safe. Steady and Stonewall obviously makes this either a lot less valuable or stops it entirely, but in the old days, this was kind of the go-to strategy, and it is pretty good. Lastly, we have what I'm calling Rush, and whether this is an archetype or a playstyle, it's kind of both, honestly. I don't necessarily think it's an archetype, but if you lean into Rush, which is, for the record, trying to win as fast as possible, going all out for damage on the villain, ignoring everything else, there are just cards in Aggression which are better for it than other cards, and they might not talk to each other in specific ways, but they are both doing the same thing, efficient raw damage quickly, so it kind of forms an archetype because you're trying to play in a certain style. Full body charge is not as efficient as one use of Clobber or playing Skilled Strike, but it does turn your entire hand into damage. I could draw Skilled Strike, but if all my other cards are, let's say, a signature upgrade or a resource card, I'm just going to get 2 damage on the villain, maybe extra from my hand that round. Whereas if I got full body charge, yes, card for card, it's not as efficient as Skilled Strike, but I'm getting 8 damage extra instead of 2 damage. Also, shoutouts to Counterattack here. Maybe not the best with Drop Kick as well here, but it is a good way to get damage onto the villain quickly for cheap. I'm giving Justice the same 3 umbrella archetypes, kind of. Thwarting events, basic thwart, and ally thwarting. But basic thwart doesn't have a ton of variation compared to aggression, basic attack, but thwart events definitely has variation, and ally thwarting has a surprising amount of variation as well. So we're going to start with thwart events, but before I get into that, I just want to quickly talk about Skilled Investigator. I'm not going to be talking about it much throughout the rest of this video, but just know I'm putting 1 in almost every single Justice deck, and if I'm in multiplayer, 2 and 2 player, 3 and 3 player, and in 4 player, I'm bringing 3 still because that's the maximum amount, but I'm wishing I could bring 4. Sometimes I'll even bring 2 in solo play, particularly if I've got player side teams, because a 0-cost card draw device that also is a really good way to block Caught Off Guard. It's just really good. Starting with the very famous low player events build, I'm calling it. It's also maybe the 0 threat left on the scheme archetype, whatever you want to call it. But things like Clear the Area, Tide, and Waylay, they either improve or become playable when the last threat is removed from a scheme. And when it comes to Clear the Area and Tide, they are very cheap and very powerful at what they do, point for point, resource for resource. One way or another brings in a side scheme that can be a good target for Clear the Area, which can then you trigger Tide, you can do something like that. But also having a lot of card draw lets you put together Clear the Area and Tide, which combo together. Waylay is a lot less efficient than these other cards on the screen, but it does allow you to do something Justice doesn't otherwise really get access to, which is big burst damage, which can be really useful. Now, I'm classifying these as low player events as kind of an overall archetype, because the less people in the game, the less threat coming in on side schemes, the less threat per turn going onto the main scheme, the easier it is for the Justice player to zero the threat, be the one to zero the threat, and then get all these benefits from these cards. One way or another, it kind of feels balanced at 2 player, but it's extraordinarily good in solo play. 3 and 4 player, it can be good, but you need to know the right scenarios, you need to count what side schemes are left in the encounter deck, and generally it's not something I'm recommending. It's very much kind of a niche tech pick for very focused kind of groups that know what to look for. But it isn't just for low player, just like Clear the Area, Tide, and Waylay. You could use them in bigger multiplayer counts, but I think they're generally better options for your deck slots. Now we can take Clear the Area, and one way or another, when we're combining them with Skilled Investigator, don't forget, we have, with these combined, an absolute ton of card draw, which we can then combine with some of the basic card draw. We could have Avengers Mansion, but Nick Fury, Ironheart, very, very good, efficient allies that are going to draw us even more cards to work through our deck faster. Well, isn't that a bad thing in Marvel Champions because we're going to deck out and get our encounter card? Yes, but every card is a resource, so they kind of refund themselves, but every card in hand is also another option, so we become more flexible. But as we move through our deck a lot faster with this kind of build where everything is drawing cards, we're going to find our best upgrades and supports faster, our board is going to power up, our whole hero is going to power up, and we're going to outpace the villain pretty significantly, which is a long way of saying, even though yes, we'll get the encounter card sooner, generally it's really, really worth it. And on the opposite of low player events, we've got big multiplayer events. So we've got Crisis Averted, which removes 6 threat from the main scheme. It also bypasses crisis icons, which can be found on pretty big scaled up side schemes, so that's handy. But really, we're going to Crisis Averted on the main scheme, and then we're going to trigger Overwatch, which is a 0-cost upgrade, which effectively duplicates whatever thwarting you did, but it puts the duplicated threat removal on a different scheme. The more players in the game, the more likely it is the side scheme will either be found in the encounter deck or played as a player side scheme. Speaking of getting good at 3 and 4 player, we have even the odds, which removes 1 threat from each side scheme per person. So at 4 player, it's removing 4 threat from every side scheme. 2 side schemes out. This is for justice, but it's removing 8 threat. If you start to have even more side schemes, which is very, very possible in 4 player, particularly with player side schemes, particularly if you build for it, it's just cleaving, 12, I've seen 16 threat removal before. Even the odds in 4 player is absolutely absurd. And the last big card I want to shout out here is Spider-Man Peter Parker as an ally. It's not an event, but it kind of falls into this archetype where it kind of scales well into multiplayer. Crisis Averted, yes, you could play it in solo play, but how often does the main scheme have 6 threat on it? Sometimes, sure, but it often goes over at that point or 1 or 2 points above, which gives you a very low flexibility on that card. But back to Spider-Man Peter Parker. A lot of Spider-Man on all of this art, by the way. After you play him, you remove 3 threat per person from a side scheme. He's actually pretty decent in solo play. Pretty nice in 2 player. At 3 player, he's an auto include for me. At 4 player, I wish I could have 3 copies of him. He's really, really good. In multiplayer, getting a player side scheme, because they come in with so much threat typically, should be considered a very bad encounter card. But Spidey can help basically neutralize 1 instantly with 12 threat removal in a 4 player, and then Thwart for 2 again if he needs to elsewhere, and then you've got him for next turn for a few more uses. In a similar kind of vein to big multiplayer events, we've got what I'm calling a multi-target thwarting. We're going to use the specific resource card and upgrade on the board that can increase thwarting on our events to increase it against multiple targets at once. Passion for Justice and Operative Skill, if used on multitasking, take it from 2 threat removed from one scheme and 2 from another, to 4 removed from one scheme and 4 from another. And 3 steps ahead takes this even further. You can also note that if you thwart a scheme with Overwatch on it, and you've increased it through Passion for Justice and Operative Skill, Overwatch will kind of reflect that increased thwarting to another scheme as well, which is quite good. But do be aware that 3 steps ahead, that any one instance of the threat removal from 3 steps ahead will be removed with Overwatch if you're using Overwatch with this card. They've gone back and forth on the ruling a couple of times, but effectively if you use 3 steps ahead on a scheme and you remove 2 threat, 2 threat, and 2 threat, you might think that's 6 threat, but Overwatch is only going to register 1 instance of 2 threat. Next up, if your hero has the aerial trait, you have access to Agile Flight and Yaw and Roll, as well as, of course, the Power of Flight resource card can become a little bit helpful here, but that is a little bit more niche, probably more for Angel and Falcon still. Interestingly, these are very, very different events. Agile Flight lets you split 5 threat removal up, while Yaw and Roll needs you to thwart first, so while it's a cheap event, which does remove a good amount of threat for its cost for an aspect card, you have to have some other way to thwart first and enough threat to justify both. And then we've got Infiltration. Now, this might be more of a side synergy, kind of like just a weird note here, but Infiltration does have a chance to bring in a minion, so typically this is a card I'm more inclined to use on a character that is rewarded for minions, such as, Valkyrie, Rocket, Thor. In an interesting way, the Raft is kind of the same. If I'm getting more minions, the Raft is going to get more threat removal faster. It's got more kind of tempo that way, but I'm also removing minions from the encounter deck for the second deck pass. This makes Infiltration safer and less likely to have you get caught on the second deck pass when you use Infiltration, but it does mean that characters that like minions as their encounter card are going to get them less often because you've locked potentially 3 of them away in the Raft. As a note, I very rarely let the Raft go over its limit. I normally leave it with 3 minions in there. I like to combo with S.H.I.E.L.D decks to exhaust it, or Infiltration to make Infiltration safer in the future. Next up, we have what I'm calling Basic Thwart, but there's not a ton to add here. It's basically got 3 core cards: Heroic Intuition to base your thwarting, Making an Entrance to boost your thwarting even further and get some healing, and then Justice Serve to ready you up so you can thwart again with your boosted thwarting from Heroic Intuition, ideally. As a note, Overwatch is very good here too. It's very good in most decks, to be honest, but since you're boosting your thwarting up with Heroic Intuition and then probably making an entrance, you end up being able to Overwatch 5, sometimes 6 threat to a different scheme, which is really good. Now, whatever kind of basic thwart deck I'm running, I've almost always got at least 1 Justice Served, 1 or 2 Heroic Intuitions, and 2 to 3 Making an Entrances. But then we've got some kind of faction versions of it. CITT, again, as long as you're here as a Guardian, you don't need anything else, just CITT and a good thwarting stat. We talked about the Web Warriors already for aggression. Yes, you could just run Spider-Man Peter Parker, but you're probably better off just going all into the Web Warriors. Again, Earth-Smited Heroes for Avengers, you're going to want 4 to 5 targets. Manifold, who came with Shuri's pack, is another new really good target for this. And if you're an X-Men hero with Utopia, you're going to want, in my opinion, a minimum of 6, but ideally 7, 8, 9 X-Men allies so you can ready up consistently. So let's talk more about allies. Unlike Aggression with Boot Camp, we don't really have one kind of unifying ally thwarting card for Justice to really set it up. There's Command Center, which can be okay, but it can be fun. Generally, generic Justice allies, it's kind of like the plain attacks and aggression. To me, this is kind of a stepping stone to having more cards in the smaller collection, or maybe at this stage when you're just playing the good generic allies, which are good at threat removal. It's more of a side synergy, you're adding it into something else you're trying to do, as opposed to fully building into this. But it is worth mentioning that I really like Jessica Jones, scales really well with more side schemes, good for multiplayer. Captain Britain's really good at dealing with minions and side schemes, so that can be kind of nice for solo or two-player Justice especially. If I'm really focusing on ally thwarting, I kind of want to lean into something, and typically that's going to be the X-Men with mission training. You do not have to be an X-Men hero to play mission training, same in aggression with attack training. You just have to have the right ally on the board, and a lot of X-Men allies can be played by anybody. You can be an Avenger, you can be a Guardian, you can still play the X-Men ally. Then you can give them +1 thwarting and +2 hit points. And in lower player counts, that can handle an absolute ton of your thwarting for several turns. In multiplayer, you probably want at least 2, maybe 3 allies with mission training, get them all out, and then you have a really solid engine going. It can be a little bit slow compared to events or basic thwart, but the value is extremely high, particularly with game time, particularly with Utopia, and some of the allies are quite good as well. We, of course, just like attack training, have to consider Danger Room and Expansion, and because we're Justice, we can get to Alter Ego a lot more easily, particularly because Professor X, Dazzler as X-Men allies, they have Confusers, but we could also just throw in a couple of Sonic Rifles, something to that effect, to get Alter Ego. But because these allies are such high value, we can also consider First Aid. It's just kind of like with Guardian's Aggression, we're going to have to be very considerate of our deck space and tempo. Going even more specific, we have Husk, who's an X-Men ally who does love mission training, that you can pour resources in to use her again and again. In multiplayer, if somebody else can put Inspired on Husk, it's incredibly valuable, or otherwise in solo, maybe you're a character that really needs a resource sink, Husk is really, really good. We also have Justice Web Warriors. We basically take the basic Web Warrior cards and then the best of the Justice Web Warrior allies. Some of them are quite fun. This version of Spider-Man you can see on screen is my favorite of them, and we can even use Chance Encounter to find him again and again and get some really good card draw also going off Web of Life and Destiny, as well as some really good threat removal from playing Spider-Man. It's worth me mentioning Chance Encounter as just a good card for Justice in general, because allies are always good, but it's not quite so good for the X-Men in my opinion if you're going for mission training, because your ally slots might start to get a little bit full with these allies getting all these bonus hit points, but it can vary. Sometimes it's nice to get a key one back. It's really quite deck dependent. Next up, after the big umbrella archetypes, we've got S.H.I.E.L.D Justice, which is a very considerable archetype, but I wouldn't call it an umbrella archetype. This focuses on building up a board of S.H.I.E.L.D traded allies and supports to then exhaust for events which give us different benefits. We can also try and play Monica Chang to power up our surveillance teams. That becomes quite efficient and really quite desirable, and makes her quite a good target actually for Chance Encounter. There are what I would call 3 major variants of this, and in 2 of them, we're running a smaller amount of S.H.I.E.L.D cards and kind of doing something on the side as well as this. First of all, we've got Homeland Intervention, which is a 0-cost event. Let's bring 3 of them. We can exhaust up to 3 S.H.I.E.L.D cards and get 2 threat removed for each card we exhaust that way. So this could be a 0-cost card for 6 threat removal. That is extraordinarily good, but we do need to set some things up so it is slow to pay off. If you get a couple of these in your opening hand, generally you're very sad. But on the second deck pass, they suddenly start to work immensely well. So this is a bit of a slower kind of build. It's worth noting there are cards out there like the Raft that are fully functional even if they're exhausted, which is kind of nice. And we can use Agent 13 to ready things up. And Field Agent is a very cheap way to spam sort of shield things onto the board to have plenty of targets. It's also worth mentioning, because you're generally going to aim to get 6 threat removal from Homeland Intervention, it's at its best in 2+ player, ideally 3+ player in my opinion. But then we could also ignore Homeland Intervention and go for Global Logistics, which is an event, 0 cost as well. We only need to exhaust 1 S.H.I.E.L.D event for the benefit, where we get to look at the top 4 cards of the encountered deck and basically cause havoc. We can reorganize them how we want, put them on the top or the bottom, discard cards. We can do a lot of things here. There's a very high skill cap to Global Logistics. The more you know the encounter cards and what's in your deck and what you can handle and what could be coming up alternatively, the more you can do with it. But generally, because at lower player counts, more of those encounter cards you're going to be able to see are going to be your action encounter cards, not boost cards, the more powerful this is. So in solo play, if you can see the top 4 cards and rearrange them, that's your boost card and encounter card set for the next 2 turns. If you can stun or confuse, that could be your next 3 or 4 encounter cards that you kind of know what's coming up to prepare for, but also you can organize in a way that suits you, or get rid of if anything's too bad. It's really very, very strong. On the flip side, in 4-player, almost all of those cards are going to end up being boost cards, and just reorganizing boost cards, avoiding boost cards, isn't as powerful. Though situationally, it is really good if there are really nasty boost effects, you know, when you get a boost card with the star and something awful happens, Global Logistics, being able to look at those and just discard one, actually really good. The alternative to these, where you might not be going fully into S.H.I.E.L.D, although Homeland Intervention does kind of demand you go into it a lot, so you can run Homeland Intervention and Global Logistics, a full S.H.I.E.L.D deck. I don't love to do this as often as you'd think. In solo play, it can be a lot of slow stuff when you only have yourself to rely on, and Homeland Intervention can be too much threat removal. In multiplayer, Global Logistics starts to lose value. Sometimes I'll just run 1 copy instead of 3, but also at low player counts, stuff like Savannah's team and Monica Chang is often enough to take care of a lot of the threat removal, especially if Global Logistics is having me avoid like advances and things. I just don't need Homeland Intervention. Next up, I want to cover Befuddle, which is a 0-cost upgrade, not very popular, but it is very fun. You attach it to a minion, then when a character would make a basic attack against it, the character uses their Thwart instead of their attack value. And if I'm Rocket, I want to get excess damage. Suddenly Befuddle can kind of really enable that. But it also kind of works with allies that have bigger thwarting stat than their attack stat. If you're running mission training in solo, you can turn some free thwart 1 attack allies into effectively free attack when you need it sometimes, and I actually really enjoy that. And of course, if you're boosting up your basic thwart, and maybe your Phoenix and it was already really high, and then you've got lots of high thwarting allies, Befuddle can start to kind of combo both, and you can start to delete any minion with ease. Next up, we have what I'm calling side schemes, and I could have comboed a lot of this with the low player events kind of archetype in Justice events, because one way or another is really good here to make sure we have a side scheme out. And of course, we've talked about Clear the Area, which is really good at zeroing a side scheme, but this is really kind of a way of focusing on side schemes to really bounce off them. So we've already talked about Chance Encounter, very good to get a specific ally from your deck or discard pass. If you haven't found a key ally yet, maybe a signature ally, this is a really good way to find it. Followed is really nice damage, which dodges stuns and things like that, dodges retaliate. And of course, Skilled Investigator is going to be at its most efficient if we're running one way or another and some player side schemes. This for me is kind of a side synergy, but it could kind of be a full archetype if you go really heavily into a lot of copies of Followed and so on and so forth. Just be aware that Chance Encounter and Followed, and technically Skilled Investigator, aren't going to do anything if you can't find a side scheme. So on a turn where you don't draw one way or another, you can end up with a couple of cards in hand which don't do a lot, which is why I don't tend to build into this as a full thing, but it can be fun. Player side schemes obviously make this a lot better, and if you're really preparing to bring in a lot of side schemes, the allies which kind of benefit from multiple schemes being there or are really just good at dealing with side schemes become even better. We've also got Encounter Control, which I don't think is an archetype. I don't even really think it's a side synergy, because a lot of these cards have anti-synergy. If you have something that cancels treacheries like Predictable Ploy, do you need something like Intelligence, which reorders the encounter cards, because you can cancel it whoever has that treachery. Likewise, if you use Blindfold to avoid nasty treachery cards, and then you draw Predictable Ploy, you've kind of shot yourself in the foot in a weird way, although Blindfold is really, really good. This is really representing something Justice can do well, and might want to do in part, but might not want to combo too many of these different approaches together unless you're sure they're synergistic. Also shoutouts to Global Logistics, which is my favorite kind of way to do encounter card control in Justice. Like we had Stun Lock and Aggression, we have Confused Lock with no quotation marks because Justice is so good at it. Sonic Rifle, if you run 3 of these, that's 6 confuses per deck pass. Upside the Head really wants you to be making basic attacks, then kind of forces you to use that against a villain, so that's not so good. But a 1-cost Confuse is really good. Cypher can draw you cards for having an enemy confused, as they can help you confuse enemies. And then we have the natural progression of Confused Lock, which is Float Like a Butterfly. My hot take here is that in general, Float Like a Butterfly is overrated. That's not to say it's bad, it's very usable, I enjoy it myself a lot, but some people act like this completely revolutionized Justice, but to me, you need to get a Float Like a Butterfly down to benefit from it, but then you need the right enemy to be confused at the right time, as well as have the ability to make several attacks against it to actually get good value. So it's a lot of setup to pay off, but basically, the 2-cost upgrade, the namesake of this archetype, when you attack a character that is confused, you increase the damage you deal by 1. This goes for allies that attack as well as events, as well as basic attack, so you can get a lot out of it, particularly if you play a few of these in multiplayer on different players. But just be aware, it's pretty conditional and takes quite a bit of setup. But like I say, really fun. Banshee's so good at confusing minions, Eros is really good at it too. Chamber's surprisingly good, I've actually really enjoyed Chamber. And that about does it for Justice for us. Over in Protection, we have 2 main umbrella archetypes. We've got Defense, which is all about defending, taking less damage, and getting rewarded for it. And we have Readying, which is all about making your hero card stand back up so you can use your basic attack or thwart again. Yes, you can ready to defend again. That's going to be more covered in kind of the defense archetypes. Up first, we have probably the most famous thing in protection, which is perfect defense, where if you defend and take 0 damage from the attack, you've perfectly defended it, you get rewarded. Armored Vest helps you get there. Unflappable gives you card draw, a 1-cost card that gives you card draw. Very, very strong. This is what really makes defending extremely worthwhile. Hard to Ignore starts to remove threat. And cards like Desperate Defense both help you meet the high enough defense needed to not take any damage, but also reward you for not taking any damage. Now, there are a bunch of other cards I could have put on here. There are so many ways to reduce the damage taken and get various benefits, but the main ones, the upgrades played, are Unflappable, followed by Hard to Ignore, maybe a couple of those in play. They are very, very valuable, and that is kind of what you're aiming to achieve with the least kind of effort possible in most cases, but it can depend because there are many, many variants of this. One of the most popular variants, this will be found typically in multiplayer, is Defend the Whole Table, where you're trying to stop attacks against everyone at the table. In 4-player, this could be 4 attacks, or it could be 3. It would depend if anyone's got defense cards of their own, stuns, anyone's alter ego. To me, this is a very old school kind of deck that is going to go for a very kind of old school style of play where nobody's trying to flip down. Everyone wants to stay in hero form. For me, the thing is, the first time I defend and don't take any damage, I'm triggering Unflappable and Hard to Ignore. Every time I defend subsequently, it's going to be reduced value for defending because, yeah, I'm defending the same, but I'm not getting the rewards anymore because, I've exhausted Unflappable and Hard to Ignore. So what I typically go for, instead of defend the whole table, is defend once. There could be 4 people at the table. I will just exhaust my character, stop 1 attack, and we'll find different ways to mitigate the other damage, but I am not interested in stopping other attacks by exhausting my hero in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes maybe I will, but the general idea is to put the minimum effort in to get all the good rewards from Unflappable and Hard to Ignore, and then play out my turn with the cards remaining in hand. For this, I really like consistent ways to defend. If I want Unflappable to trigger consistently and I've only put in defense events, I better hope I draw a defense event, or maybe Unflappable isn't going to trigger because I didn't have enough defense. But what can happen there is if you're trying to really consistently use events, you have too many events in hand, and all you've got is a bunch of defense events. Generally, if you've got a bunch of defense events, you are going to be more of a defend for the whole table kind of deck because that's what you're going to be playing. However, this kind of deck does not have to be selfish. You can take defend once into multiplayer, and you can still defend once officially, exhausting your hero, but you can still block for others through stuns and allies and things like that. Muster Courage is one of my favorite protection cards, but you do need to be an Avenger and generally playing on Expert, and even then there's a few villains where it doesn't work out great, but the ones where it does, it's really good for. In solo play, if I'm running Unflappable and Hard to Ignores, maybe I could run Taunt or something. We're going to come along to Taunt later, but a lot of the time, yes, I'm still trying to defend once, but I'm running a lot of allies, and I'm not blocking with the allies, I'm almost defending the allies, so the allies can then, solve the other problems in the game. It's almost like I'm playing a protection deck and a leadership deck within the same deck. We also have what I'm calling Thorns, which is retaliate kind of damage. If the enemy attacks you and they end up taking 4 damage, you're probably playing a Thorns deck where you're hitting them back with lots of little instances of damage. You're very prickly. Electrostatic Armor makes the enemy take damage when you defend. Dauntless makes them take damage if your health is high. Flow Like Water makes them take damage when you play a defense event. And some defense events, notably Sidestep, cause the enemy to take a point of damage as well. So if I defend with Sidestep, effectively the combined total here, 1 from Electrostatic, 1 from Dauntless, 1 from Flow Like Water, 1 from Sidestep, 4 damage to the enemy. That's really fun. It does take a bit of setup, it's a little bit slow, but it is quite enjoyable. Next up we have a new card, Stop Hitting Yourself. I do think the best uses of this card are a little bit niche to certain heroes that can boost up the defense stat quite significantly. But nonetheless, it's a very fun kind of archetype where you're trying to raise your defense stat, potentially way beyond where you need it, to boost the power of Stop Hitting Yourself, which is an event that after you defend against an enemy attack and take no damage, kind of in a perfect defense way, you get to deal damage to the enemy equal to your defense for that attack. The phrasing for that attack kind of looks at what was your defense in that moment when you defended, as opposed to what it is after the attack, and cards like Expert Defense can boost that by 3 for 0 cost, giving you kind of free extra damage. There are ways to do it like that. Again, I think this is best used on key heroes for it, such as Gambit, but Silk, Crew, even Nightcrawler, there's a few kind of candidates where this gets a bit more interesting, and maybe there'll be more in the future. Oh, and shout out to Jocasta, who's a really good ally for basically any deck that wants to use defense events, but it can be really nice to bring the multiple things you need together to get a really big Stop Hitting Yourself turn. Lastly, for defense, we have what I'm calling imperfect defense. So whereas perfect defense is trying to take absolutely no damage, imperfect defense is accepting that my defense isn't that great. Even if I invest a bit into defending, I might still take damage. For me, this is barely an archetype. It's almost like an incomplete version of perfect defense. It's, we can't quite do this archetype well enough. This is what kind of happens. However, there are places this is especially interesting. Spider-Ham wants to take damage, but gets rewarded for taking 1 point of damage as much as 5 points of damage, so you might as well try and reduce it as much as possible while still taking damage. Wolverine, with his upgrade where he wants to get attacked and take damage, is also in kind of a similar boat. Drax doesn't always want to commit all the resources to take 0 damage, but he wants to live long enough to get his damage going, and he wants to take attacks directly to build up his vengeance counters, so there are some really interesting places for it. Outside of those very specific examples, this is historically what has been used on heroes with a low defense stat that people want to play in protection and don't have the cards necessary to build other archetypes. For my money, probably just play a different aspect, but you can totally try this on someone like Hawkeye if you really want to. On to readying, which, yes, I'm a little bit biased. This is my favourite archetype kind of style in protection. These cards ready you up so you can basic attack again or something, and what doesn't kill me is kind of the anchor of this entire thing. It is the one readying card in protection that every hero can use. Some of them require you to have a large attack stat or the aerial trait, so on and so forth, or have tech out to be able to, repurpose it. What doesn't kill me doesn't need any of that. All you need is to have taken 2 damage on your hero, but taking damage is something that happens to most heroes, no problem. It does have a physical requirement, so power protection is especially good for it, and if you do happen to mitigate damage too well, we now have the rogue ally who can damage us to start getting this a little bit more usable, a little bit more flexibly. In addition to what doesn't kill me, most heroes in the game will have some kind of access to faction readying. I've talked about this in Aggression and Justice, so I won't go over it too much, but CITT, boom, that's all you need. All these other ones, you kind of need some matching allies in your deck to get the best out of them, but these can be very good if your hero has especially good stats. Or get some kind of benefit from, readying and basic attacking. Something like Nova getting to ready his helmet is kind of interesting. Something worth noting is that protection doesn't have a card to just permanently, kind of consistently raise your attack or thwart stat like combat training or heroic intuition. However, some web warriors do get access to Warrior of the Great Web, which can start to make the readying in protection hit hard for those appropriate characters with Spider in their hero name. If you have the aerial trait, you can play Ever Vigilant, which is a very fun card. It costs 2, it removes threat from the main scheme, and it readies you up so you're very flexibly able to deal with something else. If your attack stat is especially high, you can run Leading Blow. This card came with Drax, it's especially good for Drax, but there are a few other interesting places and ways to use it. When you would make a basic attack, you basically use Leading Blow and you discard a card from the encounter deck, you take the boost icon, subtract the amount of them from the damage you would deal, and if you still happen to deal damage through that, your character is effectively ready and you can attack again. Depending on whether your character has a really high attack stat, aerial, or maybe something like Avenger or X-Men printed on them, it's going to affect how you start to layer on the readies and which ones you prioritize. Generally, you're taking a mixture of different readying cards that best suit your character. And then we have Repurpose, one of my favorite ways to play in the entire game. It's a zero-cost event that makes you discard a tech upgrade you control. Yes, that's bad, but then you get to ready your hero and boost one of their stats equal to the cost of the tech upgrade you discarded. So you lose something, but you gain a really powerful temporary stat boost. I watched a gameplay of someone playing one of my decks recently, and just turn 1, they played the tech card, then they immediately repurposed, got rid of it, getting very little value out of the original tech card. And then yes, they got to attack with their boosted stats, but that was it. Ideally, you want to try and work down the counters on your tech cards like Plasma Pistol or Energy Barrier, so you've got 1 left. 2 is fine in a pinch, but preferably 1. And then when you use Repurpose to ditch the tech card, get the ready up, get the stat boost, you want to do it when you've got other readies in your hand, whether that's another copy of Repurpose and you can start to stack the stat boost by repurposing multiple times in a turn. That's ideal, but generally Repurpose and at least 1 other ready to make a second use of these boosted stats is perfect. Repurpose to me is a combo card, not just with having tech on the board to combo by discarding to get the stat boost, but also with other readies, which is where the big value is. It is a little bit difficult that you have to set up tech first, then you need to find Repurpose, and ideally have some other way to ready, so readies that are kind of permanent on the board, which you can use every turn, are better. But the value you can get from this is so incredibly high, it is generally worth it. There is a little bit of a risk reward, or at least harder setup, harder to bring things together, but really, really good payoff. Much more so than the other readying archetypes we've looked at, which are just generally using whatever your hero stats are. Repurpose can boost them significantly. We also do have ally builds in protection. There's a couple I actually quite like. Up first, we can just block with allies. Now, any aspect can do this, but some of the protection allies are especially well suited for this. Luke Cage comes with a tough card. Martyr can actually generate a tough card from defeating enemies, and Victor Mancha has reduced damage taken from attacks. If we combine this with Hanger Bay, we can defend with an ally and ready it up. So we can then get to use their stats the next turn immediately. It's a lot quicker tempo. Or if perhaps we're in multiplayer or we draw the Assault card and we get attacked a second time, we can defend twice with the same ally in that round. For my money, Hanger Bay isn't always worth it, but it is especially fun and satisfying because there's nothing more kind of infuriating than you play an ally, oh, don't want to use its stuff, gotta wait, use up its stuff to block an attack, then you've got to wait to actually start using it. We can kind of specialize this a bit with Guardian ally blocking. We just talked about Martyr a little bit, who's really good with Hanger Bay, because that increased tempo lets her defeat an enemy to generate a new tough. But we also have Groot, who can heal when he gets attacked. So Groot defends an attack, takes damage, he heals, Hanger Bay ready him up, he defends another attack, takes some damage, but then gets healed back up. And by using cards like Shake It Off, which I haven't got on the screen, but when a Guardian takes damage, it gives him a tough, we can actually kind of preserve him almost indefinitely. Because if you defend with a tough, you don't take any damage, but he's still healing, he's regrowing. So that's really, really fun and can gain a significant amount of value if you play him early on in the game. Since these allies like Groot and Martyr can last for several attacks taken, it can kind of clog up your ally spots. The Guardian support card that increases your ally limit is really nice here. Then we've got what I'm calling just Guardian allies plainly. We're not trying to block with them especially, we're just trying to use them. Med Team in protection is so good for keeping powerful allies alive. It's really, really powerful. And the Guardians have some really, really good allies, such as Rocket Raccoon and Gamora. We also have Starhawk, who's going to enter and leave play quite a lot, which is where Nowhere gets really good, because then we've got a consistent source of a Guardian entering play to trigger the card draw. Next up, we've got Sticky Web Warrior Allies, which I thought was a pretty thematic name, especially if you've heard Peter Parker use his ultimate in Marvel Rivals. But what I mean by Sticky Web Warrior Allies is that allies that stick around on the board for several turns, if not most of the game, allies you want to keep in play, which is unusual for Web Warriors because Web of Life and Destiny rewards you when Web Warriors leave play. Spider UK, for example, can take up multiple minions. You just keep him in play and keep defending minions, and he basically just knocks them out for you. Spider-Man Noir isn't on here, but he can generate some really good long-term value. The new Scarlet Spider that came with Silk's pack, also kind of a long-term ally that's good to keep other allies around for the long term. And of course, Spider-Man Peter Parker, an extraordinarily powerful ally who you want to keep around as long as possible, and that's where Med Team can be quite useful. Alternatively, we can still play the traditional Web Warrior ally kind of builds, which I'm calling Quick Web Warrior allies here in protection, which is just allies which, once they've come in, you've got their special bonus. They're just allies to use. Might as well chump block with them or use up them through consequential damage, no problem. Get them back rotated into your deck. When the deck resets, play them again. Keep getting value out of Web of Life to Destiny's card draw. We've then got X-Men blocking, and we have Armor, Polaris, and Colossus, who all come in with tough status cards. And if you're playing an X-Men hero, Colossus will also cost 3 costs, so pretty reasonable price to get what's effectively multiple blocks per ally. If I play all 3 of these allies per deck pass, that's 6 blocks per deck pass. And thanks to Hanger Bay, we can potentially up the tempo on Armor and Colossus a lot. We also have protective training like mission training and attack training in the other aspects we've looked at. The protective training is a bit weird because yeah, you get more hit points, but it doesn't boost your attack or thwarting. So it can be quite slow to work for all the bonus hit points if you're taking, 1 consequential damage per attack kind of thing. But it can be very valuable. However, a way to get quicker use out of protective training is to just use the boosted HP as a way for an ally to take an extra attack or 2. This is more effective on Standard than Expert, or if maybe you're playing Gambit and with your Thief Extraordinaire, you can set up a weaker boost card so the first attack blocked with an ally is going to be dealing less damage. But I honestly quite like this build. I think it's particularly fun and a little bit underrated, particularly if this card is coming in cheaply through Danger Room, but in that situation, you're going to want to be in multiplayer. We also have one of the more traditional training builds in protection, where yep, I've got an ally with protective training, just game time it, get really good value, and thanks to Rogue and some new basic allies like Gambit, there's actually some pretty good targets that are really valuable if you boost their hit points. One of the big ones I think a lot of you guys are waiting for is Change of Fortune, which is a fun, newish card that came with Nightcrawler. So one can upgrade that. After you defeat an enemy during the villain phase, exhaust it, draw 2 cards. This is really good for rewarding cards which deal damage in the villain phase. We looked at some of those in the Thorns archetype under defense, but there are some other ways you can go about this. The way that is kind of advertised almost in the pre-con with Nightcrawler that this comes with is what I call active Change of Fortune. Once Change of Fortune is on the board, you are playing events or specifically targeting minions with specific upgrades to try and basically set up a way to defend or hit them, that's going to knock them out directly. You can also include Come and Get Me Bub to summon in minions to give you reliable targets for this, but that's more of a solo, maybe 2-player concern. Once you hit, let's say, 4-player, you're going to be seeing at least a 1 minion almost every turn, which gives you plenty of targets for Change of Fortune. And then we have what I call passive Change of Fortune, where yes, I've played Change of Fortune, but I don't want to go out of my way to kind of play cards and events to hit minions with. I'm going to play stuff that helps me mitigate the villain's normal attack, the thing I want to deal with. I kind of, it's almost my minimum defense kind of approach here, but to Change of Fortune. So the enemy attacks me. When I take the damage, I'll block some with Energy Barrier, and Energy Barrier can block damage from one character's attack and send that 1 damage out to a different target. All you have to do is leave a minion with 1 hit point, and without having to exhaust to defend the minion, without having to play an event to target the minion, I've managed to just redirect 1 little point of damage from the villain's attack onto that minion, defeating it, getting my 2 card draw. This is kind of my favorite way to do it. I only need to get 1 trigger to really break even, 2 to start profiting, and if this happens 3 or 4 times in a scenario, it's really, really good. Note that, like a lot of protection strategies, they're a little bit slower. They tend to work a bit better in multiplayer. Again, you'll have more minions there. Always worth noting the minion can be engaged with anybody for this, and generally it works really well. We also have new card Ready for a Fight that came with Silk. I love this card. There are some particular characters that get really good value for changing form. Maybe they've got a bigger hand size or some kind of awesome ability, but you can also kind of combo this with Practice Plan, which gets it back, which makes it more reliable. You've almost got 6 per deck pass instead of 3, which makes it really reliable. It doesn't always add up that way, and some characters who want to get benefit from Ready for a Fight only have a 4 hero hand size. So if you get Ready for a Fight in your hand and Practice Plan, that's half the cards you're going to see and be able to use, and if you pay for it, you've only got 1 card left. So it can be a little bit slow tempo or kind of, consuming your options in, a 4 hand size hero, but it can still be really fun. We can combo it with something like Perfect Defense. And one of the weaknesses of Perfect Defense is you go Alter Ego, you're not going to trigger Unflappable for that round. With Ready for a Fight, you can go Alter Ego, do whatever you need, then when the villain phase flips around when you start getting attacked, you can trigger Ready for a Fight, go back to hero form, exhaust to defend, trigger Unflappable again. And that kind of ability to change form faster with that different timing makes Angel's Airy even better as a way to heal as well. Next up, we have Healing in Protection, which is kind of an archetype, but not in the sense that we discussed early on. These cards don't mechanically interact with each other. The whole is not greater than the sum of its parts. You just get the same value. But there are definitely a lot of healing cards in Protection. Med Team is at its best when it's healing allies. Night Nurse is so good. This might just be point for point one of the best cards in Protection in my opinion. Probably my most used card in Protection. Dr. Sinclair is a new support card that can help heal other people at the table when they go Alter Ego. And Second Wind just heals an identity, but is significantly less efficient than the other options we're talking about here, so it doesn't see a lot of widespread play. Generally, it's more efficient to block damage on heroes than heal it, but it can be useful, and more than that, it can be really fun and satisfying, and everyone at the table will love you for it. Next up, we have Thwart, which again, I don't know if it's a proper archetype. It's more of a side strategy that you can lean into different degrees, particularly if you're running Fawns or something, because the Thwart cards get you attacked again, so you can trigger all your extra damage, or maybe if you're Alter Ego, you can flip down and use Thwart and still trigger Unflappable if you're running that kind of deck. The card called Thwart itself draws you 3 cards after making the villain attack you, whereas Bait and Switch removes 4 threat from the main scheme. Removing 4 threat from the main scheme isn't a terrible deal, but it's a little bit restrictive being on the main scheme, and drawing 3 cards is generally just better. So some decks I'll run 1 Thwart, just smash a little bit in there. Some decks that are really rewarded for Thwart, particularly on heroes that get a benefit for being attacked, like Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and Drax, I'll be running maybe 3 copies, and then occasionally I'll splash in 1 or 2 bait and switches on top of that, especially if I'm really trying to lean into it on purpose. Next up is Stunlock, and no one does it quite like Protection, which can potentially run 3 copies of Tackle, 3 copies of Never Back Down, Iron Fist, and Mockingbird, for a total of 9 stuns per deck pass, which is pretty immense. In solo play, that villain is not going to activate, as long as you can trigger Never Back Down, because that's a perfect defense card, you need to take no damage from the attack, but nonetheless, Protection is very good at shutting down villain attacks. And that's about it for Protection. Next up is Leadership, and I have not 3, but 6 Umbrella archetypes. It's a huge aspect with lots and lots going on. Interestingly, kind of the opposite of Protection in terms of the cards in Leadership have the least interaction with the hero you're playing, but you have the most variety within the aspect itself in terms of what it can do with the allies and different things going on there. Swarm and Recursion are the most known ways to play leadership. Unfortunately, they are probably also the most boring ways in my opinion. So unfortunately, the fact that some of these turn players off playing leadership is a little bit of a shame, but for most people, they really enjoy leadership, and there is a lot of fun to be had with Swarm and Recursion as well. It's just important they are not the only way to play it, and there's also fun variety within the way that you do play them. Swarm, I think, kind of speaks for itself. It's lots of allies, generally cheap allies, or allies that draw you cards, so, kind of refund yourself and find you more allies to play, so you just build up your board of allies. Played at its most simple, yeah, it's not that interesting, but you can add different flavor in with different traits and different things going on, which is really fun. Recursion can kind of be tied into Swarm. There's a little bit of overlap here, because Recursion is playing the same allies again and again, getting them back in different ways. But if an ally goes out of play and you bring it back, you start to build up your allies again. It can kind of be a Swarm thing as well, or you can just focus on one perhaps more expensive ally and just make sure you keep playing him over and over again for some kind of benefit. Long-term allies is kind of a catch-all term for allies that stick around on the board, like our sticky web warriors in protection. There are various ways to do this, which are all very different in a way, but also all very similar in terms of how they play and how you get value out of them. Generally, they've got really good stats that you build up through some means, and if you can heal them or avoid them taking damage, it's even better. We've then got ally batteries, which is a few cards which make you build your decks in a different way, where you're generally exhausting your allies to get some kind of benefit. You've got leaving play, which is all about cards that make allies leave play, or allies that leave play when they do some kind of specific action, and how to get the most value out of those. And lastly, we're going to have stat boosts, which I think speaks for itself, but these are cards which are going to give temporary boosts to your thwarting, your attack, that kind of thing, or to your allies, and getting the most out of that. Up first, we have Mixed Swarm, and if you remember the beginning of this video where we talked about plain sort of aggression attacks, this is kind of the same thing. This is an archetype only that we have a cohesive kind of game plan, which is play cheap allies, but we're just kind of taking the best we can from anywhere, and the whole isn't necessarily greater than the sum of its parts. They're just individual allies doing their individual thing, but they're just very well priced. Focusing in, we can start to bring in traits. Mighty Avengers is a really powerful support card which increases all the damage and thwarting your allies do by 1. The more allies you have, the more attacks you're making, that kind of thing, the more boost you're getting from Mighty Avengers every turn. An Avengers Tower, by increasing your ally limit, and Stinger living outside the ally limit, really lets you build up a big board of allies to keep on attacking with boosted stats. We can also include Avengers Assemble, which we're going to talk about slightly later in the video, but this is a really good way to get tons and tons of burst damage. This card, people think is, oh, it's a multiplayer card. Actually, this could be a really powerful finisher card in solo play. Just slap 1, maybe 2 of these in your deck, and you can pull off some immense game-ending combos. Up next, we have Uncanny X-Men, and like Mighty Avengers, it's a support card which boosts all your X-Men in play, but unlike Mighty Avengers, instead of boosting the attack and thwart, it boosts the hit points and reduces their cost. This is extraordinarily valuable. If I play 3 allies in 1 turn, Uncanny X-Men has effectively served as 3 helicarriers on that turn. I've got 3 discounts. It is absurd, but then those allies are sticking around, getting to do more for longer, or use their hit points to survive longer from things like boost effects which could damage them, or encounter cards which might damage allies as well. Utopia is also extremely, extremely good. Avengers Tower, yeah, it can discount an Avenger by 1, but Utopia can ready up your X-Men hero, which is a lot more valuable than a 1-cost discount. And don't forget, Uncanny is discounting all your X-Men anyway. This is a very powerful deck. There are a couple of other ways to sort of play Swarm, but generally Avengers and X-Men are what are doing it best by far, and otherwise you're just trying to take the best allies to do it. Moving over to Recursion, there are various different Recursion tools, but depending on the player count and the allies you have with you, you might prefer to take different ones. You might take 3 copies of Make the Call and 3 copies of Rapid Response, or if the ally only does something when it's played from hand, because Make the Call and Rapid Response, yeah, they bring an ally into play, but they don't play it from your hand. Suit Up and Regroup are better suited for that, because they do put the ally in your hand to be played to get the full effect from anything that demands it be played from hand, such as Moon Girl. Now you can use Recursion in a very targeted manner, so I've got this insert name Recursion. Maybe targeted Recursion would have been better, but basically you've got one ally who's really, really good, your best value ally, and you're just going to go out of your way to keep playing them over and over again. Some good targets for this are Maria Hill in multiplayer, particularly 4-player. She's drawing you 4 cards, and she can thwart for 2, and she can block an attack. It is crazy. Nick Fury is also good for this. In order to be able to recur one ally multiple times on the same turn, readying is particularly good. We're going to look at Command Team and other readies pretty soon. You can also use Call for Backup to get an ally that has already been in play back into play, or find one to get in your discard pile to start off, make the call having its target. Moon Girl, who I've mentioned, is one of those allies that wants to be played from hand, so Suit Up is very good for her, while Make the Call is basically useless. And then of course we've got Mass Recursion, which isn't really targeting a specific ally, doesn't really have a certain game plan, more than just allies are strong, let's play all the strong allies again and again. Of course, targeting stronger allies, putting more stronger allies in the deck is going to give you good targets and is going to be desirable generally. But generally trying to play as much as you can. This kind of leans into kind of the swarm kind of recursion, maybe hybrid kind of thing. Regroup is absolutely absurd in multiplayer. When an ally is defeated by an enemy attack, return it to the owner's hand. If you have 4 players, each taking an attack, each blocking with an ally, Regroup, which is a 1-cost card, has put 4 cards into the team's collective hands. Typically it's going to be a powerful ally, a little bit more powerful than the average card, which just makes it so strong. We also have big ally recursion. Rapid response is kind of the king for this one because something like Suit Up or Make the Call makes you pay the full cost of the ally, whereas rapid response, and also the player's side scheme Call for Backup that we mentioned, don't ask about the cost, you just play the card, trigger it, and then an ally, it doesn't matter if it's 1 cost or 5 cost, it will be put into play. And here's Command Team, 2-cost support, which gives you 3 readies for allies used once per turn. You can play a big ally, use up its stats quickly, rapid response it to bring it back, Command Team again, rapid response it again. You'd have to get the sequencing down because you can only have 1 rapid response at a time, but you can trigger rapid response, then play another rapid response in the middle of this kind of sequence, and it can have some crazy combos and be very fun. 3 of my favourite allies for this are Beast, Goliath, and Giant Man. A more specific version of this revolves around the Captain Marvel ally. Now what's special about her, you can just recur her like any big ally, rapid response being especially good here. But when she enters play, she discards cards from your deck, and you're looking to find 2 energy resources in the top 4 cards of your deck. Building into that many energy resources to make this consistent changes your deck dramatically, so I count this as a separate kind of archetype variant. You also have Mutant Mayhem, which is a very specific card. It's an alliance card. Choose an X-Force and X-Men ally, return them to their owner's hands. Those players play the allies again, ignoring their resource costs. This is an alliance card, kind of like Gunboat Diplomacy, which is also really good in solo play, better in multiplayer, but still good in solo play. If I have Beast and Hope Summers on the board, an X-Men and X-Force character that anyone can play, and I Mutant Mayhem them, I'm getting at least a double resource card, and I'm getting a superpower card for my deck if I'm playing the right character, but most X-Men and X-Force do have superpowers, so typically works pretty well. This is a really fun way to recur allies, because the allies you're playing again were already on the board at the time, whereas most of the ways we're doing this is after the allies leaving play for some reason or has already been in the discard pile, but it's still recursion, because you're still playing them again. The refreshed full health enters play abilities trigger again, and is very strong. Strong enough that non-X-Men and X-Force characters can also run this. Shoutouts to Captain Marvel. I've also put Web Warriors under recursion. Now you could consider a leadership Web Warrior focused deck to be Swarm, but the Web Warrior event across the Spider-Verse is all about recursion, and the leadership specific Web Warrior, the only one we currently have in the game, is all about putting allies back into your hand to play them again as well. So really the actual Web Warrior specific things do push you toward recurring allies. Moving on to long-term allies, we're going to start with ally upgrades. Now most of you have probably heard of Voltron decks, which comes from, I think, Magic the Gathering or something. It's probably where a lot of the terms in this video come from, and I'm just not aware of that. But I think the term Voltron is used pretty loosely in Marvel Champions these days. 2 upgrades on an ally? Oh, I Voltroned it. I don't know if 2 upgrades on an ally does mean you Voltroned it. I think it just means you played a couple of upgrades. To me, if you're going to Voltron an ally, put tons of upgrades on it, really boost it up to kind of be an extra hero on the board functionally, you're going to need more than 2 upgrades. But nonetheless, just putting 1 or 2 upgrades on each ally is still really strong and can be really good. If I have Inspired and Reinforced Suit on 2 allies out of my 3 on my board, I'm going to be able to cover almost anything for multiple turns. In solo play, that's going to be devastatingly powerful as long as I don't need to block in an emergency. Effectively, if you're playing allies to stick around for the long term, it works best on heroes that can defend themselves. That can be through stuns, healing, as well as typical defense, but as long as you can survive without having to sacrifice your allies, you can afford to invest upgrades onto them and get a value out of them across several turns. And because you've upgraded these allies and you're getting significantly better value per use if you've put 2 to 3 upgrades on them, you're going to start to be able to use First Aid to heal them up and continue profiting from their massive stats turn after turn. And because our allies are typically lasting a long time with upgrades and healing, we might need Triskelion to increase our ally limit. A way to do this would just be to have 1 or 2 allies upgraded and then use the last ally slot as the rotating slot with Triskelion 2 rotating slots works really well. There are quite a few allies that are especially good with upgrades. Deathlok can find an upgrade, Legion can self-heal, Ronin gets a bonus with upgrades on him, and there's a lot more allies than you think that can be really beneficial to have their stats boosted and health increased. One more specific kind of variation of this is Danger Room Training, where we're putting the Danger Room Training upgrade on an X-Men ally, then we can game time them, maybe we use Danger Room to make it easier to get the upgrade on them, or maybe we use X-Mansion to keep healing them up. But regardless, you're kind of getting the benefits of Inspired with a little bit of extra health too. People talk this card down a bit because it doesn't have the extra health increase that Attack Training or Mission Training has, but the flexibility here is really good. If you've ever played Inspired and got good value out of it, this is Inspired with +1 hit point. It's pretty nice. We can combine this with health increases, other stat boosts as well, and we've got Phoenix who can also ready your allies, and if your ally has especially good stats and does what you need in the moment, you can even trigger Utopia to ready an ally rather than your hero if you're an X-Men hero. But I should mention, although yes, you probably don't run Uncanny X-Men in this instance, you can run an X-Men Danger Room Training deck on a non-X-Men character. And then we have Voltron, which I've already kind of talked about a bit. I think you can't talk about allies sticking around and being upgraded without talking about it. But Voltroning an ally generally means slapping on a bunch of upgrades onto one ally and making an absolute powerhouse that your kind of whole game plan is going to revolve around. It's not unusual to see 4 or 5 upgrades end up on one of these allies, and maybe you've got 1 card or 2 on your board that are boosting its stats up as well, like Team Training, or if it's an Avenger ally, Mighty Avengers, something like that. And if you did that, you'd have what we'd call Avenger Voltron, which is handy because there are multiple good Avenger targets for upgrades, notably Iron Man and Ronin. We can use Inspiring Presence as a nice way to get extra uses out of them, and Mighty Avengers is just a nice stat boost to multiple allies, because you can potentially set up 2 allies with this, 3 allies, even if you've got 1 main target that you Voltron. For me, I could have Iron Man and Ronin in an Avenger Voltron deck, and whichever one I get to play first, that's going to be my main one, probably for the rest of the game. This is probably a good point to note that whatever kind of Voltron deck you're running, I think you want multiple targets. Even if there are a couple of targets which are most desirable, they could be at the bottom of your deck. I love taking 4 to even 5 targets if I can, to make sure I've got a good character, and make sure I don't just have a bunch of upgrades in my hand with no valid target that's good to play them on. Guardian Voltron is very famous. Yondu's a very famous Voltron ally because he doesn't take consequential damage. Unfortunately, he's really expensive with really low attack stat, so he's very slow tempo, but in the long run, doesn't take any consequential damage, you can keep attacking. I actually prefer to Voltron Gamora and Rocket and try and find some way to heal them, such as First Aid, because they are cheaper and they do so much more per activation. Now, if you're running a Guardians upgrade kind of deck, there's a good chance you might include Guardians of the Galaxy, which is a card that rewards you for playing upgrades on an ally. This makes me especially like Honorary Guardian, even if the ally I'm playing it on is already a Guardian, because I basically get +1 hit point on that ally, and I draw a card to replace it, no problem. The only issue with this archetype is that you need to play an ally worth upgrading, typically expensive. Upgrades are a little bit slow to gain value. You've got to play this other 2-cost support that's a little bit slow to gain value. If I find this before I've got an ally, or if I find this and I've got an ally but no upgrades, it doesn't do anything immediately, but it is really fun. Card draw is very powerful, and characters like Venom and Nebula can run this really well. We can even do the much rarer X-Men Voltron, which, yes, Danger Room Training, yes, Inspired, but then we can even bring an Advanced Suit to heal them, Reinforced Suit, Double Suit, why not? Get them healthy. Advanced Suit's a little bit weird, and Uncanny X-Men really rewards playing lots of allies to keep getting that resource discount multiple times, but you can totally do this even if it's not optimal, because there are a surprising amount of good targets, and what can be really nice is if somebody in a different aspect, let's say somebody in protection with a rogue ally, you just play your upgrades on their ally, and it can be really, really good. This can also be an example of not being an X-Men character, but bringing some of the X-Men upgrades, because your buddy's got X-Men allies, they might be an X-Men hero, and you can use teamwork. These kind of things I don't think are explored very much in Marvel Champions. You kind of have to deck build together, but they are totally valid and very strong. Next up, we have Uncanny X-Force, which is the first real archetype here that doesn't revolve around ally upgrades, but because of the way Uncanny X-Force basically prevents allies taking damage from thwarting side schemes, they get to stick around longer because, they're not taking damage. Thus, upgrading them can get you extra value because you've got more turns. Unfortunately, I think there are only a couple of X-Force characters that really want to run this, those being Cable and Psylocke. We can give this a particularly decent go on Domino and Deadpool as well. Again, because the allies stick around, we've got Triskelion and First Aid. These are pretty good for all of these long-term ally builds we've been talking about here. Last but not least, we have Sidekick. This archetype is really fun. You play your signature ally, you play Sidekick on it, and now it's your actual sidekick that you can use side by side to ready you both up. It's very strong, really good if you've got good stats on your hero and signature ally or extra effects and abilities. X23 is absolutely absurd with this as a quick recommendation. Suit Up is a nice way to both find your signature ally and sidekick to put on that ally. The only thing that can be a problem is affording Suit Up, then affording the signature ally, then affording sidekick. So a lot of heroes who have a really expensive signature ally, which would be good if you did put sidekick on and start readying them up with side by side, can be a bit awkward to get going. So a 2 to 3 cost signature ally with pretty decent stats is actually really desirable for sidekick, and often, in my opinion, works a lot better because you can set it up so much more reliably. Moving on to ally batteries, and early on we got strength in numbers in the first ever hero pack with Captain America. This card is very, very strong because you exhaust allies, and for each ally exhausted you get to draw a card. A weird way to look at this card is it turns all your allies into Avengers Mansions. So yes, I have to play a 0 cost card to turn my allies into card draw, but the card that's imitating Avengers Mansion, drawing a card by exhausting, it's so much more expensive. It's actually typically really good value. And what drawing tons of cards means is you start to have much more flexible terms in what you play. You find your powerful upgrades faster. It's kind of the turbo draw of leadership, particularly if the allies you're exhausting have already drawn you cards such as Ironheart or Kalu. And I also really like it with the Clint Barton Hawkeye ally, because you can still shoot your arrows with him, even if you're exhausting him here and now. And X23, who can defeat a minion, ready up, then be exhausted for strength in numbers, giving you pretty good tempo. Now, what's interesting about strength in numbers is a lot of old talk about this card is, oh, you need Avengers Tower to increase your ally limit, Triskelion, try and get 5 or 6 allies, and then start drawing 5 or 6 cards. That is really good, but at the time that you could draw 5 or 6 cards, if you've got 5 or 6 allies out, you're probably just winning the game anyway and don't need to do any of this and didn't need to bring strength in numbers, although it can be useful to help set up quickly. For my money, strength in numbers is at its most powerful when you're just trying to play 3, maybe if Triskelion is down, 4 generic allies that are just cheap and good, and then you exhaust those for 2 to 4 card draw, and that's very powerful. It's just very easy to set up. Up next we have Strength in Diversity, which is a new card coming in Falcon's pack, which can be ran on its own, but can also be run alongside Strength in Numbers. I think that's going to be very popular. This card rewards you for each different trait on friendly characters in play, and there are multiple characters that have 2 different traits, some of them quite unusual, but there's also Vivian who has 3 traits and she's really cheap. If I were to play Vivian, Kid Omega and Blade, which at that point in time would look kind of like a generic Swarm deck, I'm getting 7 threat removed and 7 damage dealt for a 2-cost event. And I've still got those allies who are all good individually. And I haven't had to exhaust them like Strength in Numbers. This is crazy. If I was playing, let's say, I don't know, a Guardian hero, that's 8 damage. If I had played Children of the Atom, a 1-cost card, I would be up to 10 damage at that point for a 2-cost card. This cost does scale up in multiplayer, so I was mostly talking about solo there. But in multiplayer, you are going to have more traits. Typically not double. I don't think the extra cost is fully justified. It's going to be at its strongest in solo play. But it's so absurdly good, it's still going to be good in multiplayer. Up next is Band Together. Now, Band Together actually doesn't need you to exhaust anything. It's kind of the anomaly here. But it does need multiple allies from the board to power up, and without any allies, it is the worst card in the game. But with 3 allies, it is a triple resources, kind of like the best resource card in the game then. So this can really slow you down on turn 1 if you get it in your opening hand and you have no allies to play to be able to make Band Together useful. But on the flip side, if you are starting to amass allies in some kind of Swarm deck or something, or you're building up allies for Strength in Numbers and you're using a card draw from Strength in Numbers to, keep expanding, Band Together can power up really, really quickly and is really, really strong. It just has that risk-reward element for the early turns. We have new card organizational support that came in Maria Hill's precon in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. This wants to exhaust allies or supports, but they must share the same trait as your identity. Then you get to generate resources for each ally or support exhausted. This is kind of a fusion of Band Together and Strength in Numbers, but it also introduces support to something you can exhaust. Since exhausting allies stops you using their stats and things, it's kind of slower tempo. This is much more desirable on supports, in my opinion, that don't otherwise do anything, don't need to be exhausted to do what their benefit typically is, but you can totally use it on allies where you need. For me, I like organizational support the most on heroes who have some kind of support or 2, which shares a trait with them, which doesn't need to be exhausted, or the effect isn't as desirable as the extra resources from organizational support. Ant-Man's Army of Ants, which share the tiny trait with him when he's in tiny form, being probably the kind of like poster child for this whole card. Lastly, for ally batteries, we have Mass Attack, which is a card which exhausts 3 allies which share a trait with your hero, so quite a big ask to set this up. But then you get to deal damage equal to the combined totals of your allies and your hero. The problem is there's so much setup to get this going, and you could just probably attack with those allies for multiple turns before they run out of health. It's kind of too slow to get going to be very popular, but it is very, very satisfying to pull this off. Up next, we have Sneak Attack as our first part of the leaving play kind of archetype. Sneak Attack says choose an ally in your hand that shares a trait with your identity, put it into play. If it's still in play at the end of the phase, discard it. Being a 1-cost event that can get an ally of any cost in hand, you might think you're saving a lot of money here, but since you lose an ally from hand as well, it's effectively a 2-cost card in terms of what you lose from your hand in terms of paying for it, and it disappears at the end of the phase, so you're probably not going to get full use out of that ally. This makes it very hard to actually get value out of Sneak Attack compared to just playing the ally traditionally. But we can do some things in combination with Sneak Attack to increase it. So we have Command Team which readies allies, so we can Sneak Attack the ally in, it's only there until the end of the phase, but we can attack with it or thwart with it, then Command Team to ready it up and attack or thwart again, and start to get some value out of its bigger stats that way, so that's pretty nice. We can also ready up the allies with cards like Get Ready and, if we're Psionic, Psychic Kicker. I also like those cards, but the thing with Sneak Attack is you need to have Sneak Attack in hand, you need to have a big ally worth using Sneak Attack on in hand that shares a trait with your identity, and then you'd need to draw one of the readying events, so Command Team, by being able to play it onto the board, is just a lot more consistent, because you don't have to get it at the same turn as everything else. You have to have less stars align to make it work. Another way to get value from an ally we've sneaked in before it disappears are the cards which actually discard it for you. So you sneak the ally in, attack with it or something, then while it's exhausted, you can do something like Go Down Swinging to deal damage to an enemy equal to its printed cost. The ally was going away anyway, so discarding it's not a big deal here. You've turned a 0-cost card into, let's say you had Goliath on the board from Sneak Attack for extra damage. Save the Day is a little bit pricey for what it does in my opinion, and You Got This is a little bit hero specific to be sort of widely used, but Noble Sacrifice I really like for this as well. Since it's just sneaking allies in, they're not going to be around to chump block. Noble Sacrifice giving you healing and tough status cards is actually pretty nice. Much like big ally recursion, the bigger the ally, the more we're getting value from bypassing its cost, so the usual suspects are going to be here as well. And we can also look at cards like Nick Fury, sneak him in if you've got a shield on your alter ego, or maybe one of the new characters on hero form. I also really like Nick Fury Sr. You can sneak him in for 5 threat removal, then sacrifice him for 4 damage or something if you've drawn all the cards together. I should have said, the problem with Go Down Swinging or Noble Sacrifice, even if they're kind of good, is that you then need to find Sneak Attack, an ally you like, and one of those cards in hand. And hey, maybe have some readying set up as well to get even more value. It just asks for a lot for Sneak Attack, when you can get a lot of similar value by playing those allies without Sneak Attack being around, but nonetheless, it can be very fun. If you're one of those pesky mutants and you have the X-Men trait, you have kind of a better version of Sneak Attack built in. So whenever I see an X-Men Sneak Attack deck, I kind of think to myself, why didn't you just use To Me My X-Men? This is a 1-cost event, which says search the top 5 cards of your deck for an X-Men ally and put it into play. If the ally is still in play at the end of the phase, add it to your hand. So it's Sneak Attack, but it doesn't take the ally from your hand, it takes it from your deck, leaving you with more resources and options in hand to play around this card. And then at the end of the phase, yes, it leaves play, just like with Sneak Attack, but you get to add it to your hand. So you lose 1 card less for playing it, and then you end up with 1 extra card in your hand. It's so much better. It's absurdly better. It's really good. The only downside is searching the top 5 cards of your deck. If there's no X-Men there, you've wasted the card itself and the resource you spent on it. However, if you're running this card, typically you're running 10 plus X-Men allies to make this really consistent. So let's say you play it 5 times, and I think you'd have to be unlucky to only get it to hit 3 times. But even if it did hit 3 out of 5 times, I still think you're getting good value because it's just such a good card. The X-Men allies you're putting into play, there are a lot of them now thanks to Magneto's pack really rounding out leadership X-Men that have really good end-to-play effects that get you really good value. And thanks to Uncanny X-Men, when you end up with them in your hand, and I should say the timing is that you draw your full hand size, then you get it into your hand, so it's kind of extra for next turn. You can just play them for cheaper and start to kind of combine it with Swarm. A lot of people have said to me my X-Men is a Cyclops Ernie deck, but these days with more X-Men allies, I absolutely do not think that's the case, and I think this is a really strong card. I actually used this with Storm recently, because when you combine her Thunderstorm extra damage into getting the ally in temporarily and readying it, it's just really good. Stepping away from Sneak Attack and its better X-Men specific variant, To Me My X-Men, we can just play a deck based around the discarding events without worrying about sneaking the ally in first. We can play an ally, use it up more, and then sacrifice it for a benefit. I will say Noble Sacrifice and You Got This, you don't need expensive allies for it. If You Got This, you just need kind of decent stats, a noble sacrifice, you just need, in my opinion, at least 3 hit points. More is obviously better, but 3 is fine and very accessible, and there are actually some cheap allies with 3 HP, which makes it really kind of accessible healing. Now, if you do want to play a deck around this, you don't have to pick multiple of these cards, especially if you're using it more like a side synergy. You can just throw in 3 noble sacrifices, slightly tailor your ally choices to make sure you've got enough good targets for it. There's also Last Stand, which is sneakily kind of the 5th card in this category. It doesn't discard the ally to get you a bonus, it gets you a bonus and then makes you discard, but you still lose the ally, so it is very similar. Depending on the ally, Go Down Swinging can get you more damage, or Last Stand can get you more damage on cheaper allies. Go Down Swinging lets you kind of basic attack somewhere with the ally, then discard it to put damage elsewhere, whereas Last Stand combines it with their basic attack damage. So there's different pros and cons here, and which one you use will depend on which allies you use. Our last big umbrella archetype here is stat boosts. Leadership has a lot of stuff, guys, and a lot of it's quite niche, so I felt the need to really explain it. But stat boosts are at least pretty self-explanatory. We're playing cards that boost the stats of characters, whether it's our hero, our allies, or both. And if we are boosting the stats of our allies for the phase or round, we might as well use Command Team to ready them up and get that extra value a second time around. Lead from the front is the classic, it's from the core set. I think this card is actually pretty underrated. It's nice to slot one of these in here sometime, especially if you're trying to finish off the villain, or you really need like a little bit of extra juice from a board of allies you've built up. Morale boost I don't really use very often, but it does exist, same as R&D facility. I think people like these cards. They're not necessarily the most powerful, but they can be really, really fun. And on characters that ready, or characters, decks that can ready allies a lot, they can get a lot of extra value. We also have team-specific stat boosters. We already mentioned Avengers Assemble, which ready your allies, then give them a stat boost. So you kind of do a smaller attack, ready them up, and then do a bigger attack. Really good for closing out games, really good for kind of solving emergencies. I actually really like this card. We also have Blaze of Glory on the Guardians. Now it does cause the characters to take damage afterwards, so again, this is more of a finisher for me or for very high tempo games, but in those instances, or if you're Star-Lord and can go Alter Ego, which causes your allies to lose Guardian if they gained it from his hero ability. Bit complicated for this video, but nonetheless, Blaze of Glory has a couple of good places, with Star-Lord by far being the best one. And he comes with this card, so it makes sense. Getting that +2 Thwart on attack and then readying them with something like Command Team can be very strong. Both of these cards and a lead from the front really reward you for going wide, kind of swarm-like thing, or playing kind of allies that are going to stick around so you can build up a wider board, because the more allies they affect, the more value you are getting from them. We also have the cards Go All Out and Push Ahead, which combine the stats of your hero to deal massive damage or massive thwarting. They do have resource requirements, and since they exhaust your hero, you can't, get the regular damage you'd get from exhausting to attack or thwart on top of them. So you kind of have to subtract the value that way. These cards aren't adding them on. You could just basic attack and do something else instead of Go All Out. You could just basic thwart and do something else instead of Push Ahead. But if you can boost up your hero stats enough, they can do quite a bit. And maybe more than they are efficient, they are fun and very satisfying. Best on heroes which start with above average stats. And a note for Push Ahead, I only really use this in multiplayer and when somebody else is in Justice with Overwatch, so I can duplicate the large amount of threat removal. The next archetype I don't really have a kind of a known name for, so I'm naming it after a Hearthstone card, which is effectively give an ally a stat boost, and then it goes away. We've talked about boosting stats with other cards and readying the allies, but we also have some allies which boost their own stats. We have Goliath, Spider-Man Miles Morales, and Power Man. These are the key 3 allies for this archetype. You trigger their stat boost, and you ready them up. And to get as much use as possible out of them, often that does mean they are defeated and going to disappear. I really like this, it's really, really fun. I don't usually bother with lead from the front on top of it, but you totally can. In addition to Command Team, or instead of, you can also use the raiding events here. Rapid Response is also good for Goliath, maybe not so good for the others. Team Training, not so good for Rapid Response with Goliath, but pretty good with Miles Morales Spider-Man to get an extra attack out of him with his boosted stats. On top of this, if we're using up the last hit point, we might want to use Last Stand to get an extra juicy attack. Or if we can't use up the last hit point, we might use Go Down Swinging to turn whatever their cost is into extra damage here. In a similar kind of vein, we have what I call end of round levers. These are Nick Fury Sr. and Professor X. Typically you play those allies, attack or thwart with them, and then in the following phase, the villain phase, you block an attack with them by defending, and they are defeated. If they're not defeated, they will leave play anyway. What this really means is their second hit point is useless. The first hit point is taking consequential damage, and then they're just going to get attacked and disappear. By readying these characters, you kind of get extra attack or thwarting without any negative from the consequential damage like on a regular ally. On Professor X, it's really quite significant threat removal, while on the Nyx, it's not as powerful, but it's very flexible. And you can combine this with stuff like Goliath, Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and you'll always just have good targets for your readies. We have some cards, namely Mission Planning and Coordinated Attack, which can help you avoid consequential damage. If you're not taking consequential damage against a certain target or for a certain amount of time, we might as well ready up and get as many uses as we can to take out a target quicker or to make best use of that temporary invulnerability. So while all these ideas are a little bit similar, there are several decks or ideas that can really make use of a lot of readying in a very short space of time. Maybe readying could have been its own umbrella archetype here if I'd structured things differently. If you guys hadn't noticed, there's quite a bit of overlap in leadership. Certain cards are just good in different places, and you can often combine them. Freshly arriving with Falcon, we're getting Flight Squadron, which is a new way to start readying aerial allies. And a couple of the aerial allies boost the stats of each aerial character in play. So either we can use someone like Cloud9 to boost everyone's thwarting, have an aerial ally thwart with the boosted stats, play something else aerial to trigger Flight Squadron to ready that ally with its boosted stats to thwart again with its bonus, or we can use Cloud9 to increase everyone's thwarting, play the aerial card, ready Cloud9 again, and have that boost everyone's thwarting again. I think this is going to be really fun. While we're talking about aerial stuff, we also have the other side of aerial stuff in leadership, but we have Air Supremacy, which targets an amount of enemies equal to the amount of aerial characters you control, but you cannot target the same enemy more than once. So it's really a good board clearer, good for multiplayer. If there's multiple minions, you can hit multiple with pretty good damage value. This card is a little bit underrated, I think. And we've got the new Raven card. I'm going to say it wrong. Hugin and Munin I'm going for. And this is an aerial ally. And these guys, they bring in a minion. And depending on the boost icons on it, you can ready potentially multiple characters. So it can lean into the stat boost and the readying you've got on the other side of aerial. But even if it's not stat boosting, you can ready a couple of characters, which is nice. And then Air Supremacy is going to be able to hit an additional target, no problem. The last team we have to talk about is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D, which is kind of a weird card. It's a new card that came with Maria Hill's Precon. It's a free cost support, and if each of your characters has a S.H.I.E.L.D trait, it gains the interrupt when you reveal an encounter card, exhaust it, cancel the effects of this card, and discard it. This is really good. It's effectively saying we see an encounter card we don't want, we get rid of it. Unfortunately, there's another sentence. Then reveal another card from the encounter deck. So if you cancel an encounter card and get a new one, and the new one is worse, you've actually paid to hurt yourself. Now, you're generally using this on bad encounter cards, where you're more than likely to get something that was not as bad, but you're paying quite a lot and restricting yourself to just S.H.I.E.L.D allies, just to turn something very bad into something that's still some kind of bad, and might be even worse or as bad. To make it worse in multiplayer, you might see a really bad encounter card, but somebody else revealed it, it wasn't you, you can't use this to help. For me, there's a very limited pool of characters that can actually use this because, if you need all your characters with the S.H.I.E.L.D trait, either it only works alter ego for someone like Captain America, Captain Marvel, etc., or you're one of the characters like Winter Soldier, Nick Fury, Maria Hill, when she's got her whole support kind of game plan. Nick Fury, maybe. Winter Soldier really wants to play an attack every turn, but you also need to set up allies if you're going to, be a leadership. But then you want to play this card, which may or may not help you this turn, next turn, or the turn after, may hurt you. I don't know. But it's there, and it can give you some kind of fun thematic control of the encounter deck. This is a card which gets better, where the average encounter card is more difficult. Yes, you could replace something bad with something bad, but at least you do have a lot of good targets to try and replace to potentially get something a lot easier, as opposed to turning an average encounter card into a slightly below average encounter card. Now in leadership, we have a good amount of minion summoning, which is fun. We've got Squared Off, you can have 3 copies of that, and the Raven ally we just talked about. This is the same amount of minion summoning that Aggression has had for the longest time, with 3 copies of, let's say, Looking for Trouble and Angela. This is really good for heroes which want to defeat minions or get card draw from minions. And it's nice that leadership has a few cards which help deal with minions. Beta Ray Bill, good ally to discount with Squared Off because he's got a significant cost, actually helps you remove threat from the main scheme when he defeats minions. And then we've got M from Magneto's pack that came with Squared Off. You can summon her in, and then she can potentially immediately defeat the minion if they have low enough health. Shoutouts to the Hawkeye ally we mentioned earlier in the video too here. Lastly, for leadership, I just want to bring up something a little bit niche and crazy called Digging for Aid. I don't know what the official name is. I don't know if the community has another name for it. I don't think it's spoken about that often, but it does come up. So with Domino's Precon, we got Digging Deep and White Fox, both cards which have responses which trigger after they are discarded from the top of our deck. Digging Deep gets put into hand as an extra resource. White Fox comes in as a full ally, which is extremely, extremely valuable. Now, even if you play a hero which doesn't have a single signature card which discards cards from the top of your deck, you can run 3 copies of Call for Aid and or Caliban. Call for Aid says discard cards from the top of your deck until you discard an Avenger ally, then add that ally to your hand. You could run no Avengers in your deck, play this, and kind of trade it in to get potentially 3 Digging Deeps and White Fox on the board. Yes, you're getting a counter card because you decked out, but you got an ally for cheap and you have 3 extra resources. That's kind of crazy. Alternatively, we could put 1 or 2 Avenger allies in our deck, play Call for Aid, we'll discard a bunch, maybe get an extra Digging Deep or 2, maybe get White Fox, and we still get to find the Avenger ally at the end of the sequence and have that card in our hand. On a similar note for Caliban, he looks for a mutant ally. You could have 1, 2, or 0 of those depending on how crazy you want to go. So for the cost of an encounter card, or at least getting a lot closer to an encounter card, you can start to get a lot of extra value, and it's kind of fun, it's kind of weird, and if your name is Star-Lord, kind of explosive. Up next, I'm covering the pool aspect, and just a couple of shoutouts to things you can do with the basic cards. So pool has 2 main quote-unquote umbrella archetypes in my opinion, safe pool and danger pool. I actually have a whole video about the pool aspect that's very, very detailed. These days I break these down into 2 major sub-archetypes each. And starting with safe pool, we've got what I'm calling the good pool cards, which is a very simple basic phrase, but it's effectively all the pool cards, all these pink cards, which do good things with no negative consequence. And the good things they do are actually really impressive. Getting 2 healing a turn with healing factor is really convenient. I don't think the 2 healing is like amazingly powerful, but healing is typically a little bit hard to come by. Typically it's quite conditional, or you need to go to Old Trigger and recover. So it's just really accessible, and that can really open up kind of the flow of the game. Then you've got the triple resource cards, which if you're at full health, which healing factor helps with, just give you so much money. But even if you've taken a bit of damage, they're usually double resources with healing factor. It can often be quite difficult for them to be single resources, but even if they are, it's not the end of the world, because most of the game they're going to be 2 or 3. Stick-to-itiveness is a super convenient way to ready every single turn, which for some characters is just incredible. And Tic-Tac-Toe, I think, very underrated card. You get to heal any character, including an ally, that's usually really valuable, but you can also turn into kind of burst damage against an enemy, whether it's defeating a minion that was going to be a problem, or helping you burst down the villain. With correct resource placement in 2 opposite corners, you can get up to 7 damage and healing off this card. Now, as opposed to being a true kind of archetype, this is kind of a foundation to do something different with pool, whether that's layer on lots of really good basic cards. You can even do a kind of, swarm kind of deck. But if we want to get more specific with some of the pool cards without a negative consequence, we can look to the phenomenon I call Mulligan. So Mulligan is a free cost event. Discard your hand, draw a new hand. The only downside is you cannot play this if you have played another card this phase. So Mulligan is generally kind of a card which, if you have a hand of cards which otherwise you don't really like them, just play Mulligan and you get a new hand of cards, and then you've got new options. That's really quite fun and strong. However, it says you cannot play this card if you've played another card this phase. Nowhere does it say you can't spend resources elsewhere or discard cards for benefits and so on and so forth, and then play it. So with cards like Tic-Tac-Toe, which we just looked at, Blackout, the Machine Man ally, you can spend resources and then still Mulligan. So I can spend a couple of resources here and there, have, let's say, Mulligan and 3 other cards / resources left in my hand or available on the board. Then I play Mulligan, and I kind of replenish everything I had just spent. It's really, really good. You can also do this with plot convenience, attach an aspect card from your hand under there, then I can Mulligan, and oh, now I've got 5 cards again, even though I've already attached one under plot convenience. Certain heroes are really good for this as well. A very simple one would be Captain America, who can discard a card to do this all day. And then over in Danger Pool, we have what I'm calling bad icons, for lack of a better term. The pool aspect has a bunch of cards which do more or do different things depending on which negative icons are out on the board, such as Acceleration, Hazard, Amplify, and Crisis icons. Do note that Acceleration icons are different from Acceleration tokens. They're not the same thing. They basically do the same thing, but they are notably different, and one does not count as the other, and vice versa. The big downside to this kind of archetype is pool is generally considered a risk-reward kind of thing, but the risks tend to outweigh the rewards, but there are some really fun ways to use these. A more niche way to use the icons would be to power up laser swords in what I'm calling the Jedi Knight sub-archetype, because laser swords, and specifically in the picture, those are lightsabers, you cannot tell me otherwise. We can potentially get a maximum of +4 to our attack stats, so if we're a hero who likes readying, and we then include stick-to-itiveness, which can ready us every turn pretty reliably, we can start to get massive damage. The only downside is we need to keep these bad tokens on the board and not lose the game. You have a couple of ways to go about this. You can run mostly what I'd call a safe pool deck with none of the negative stuff, but just throw in laser swords and maybe 1 or 2 allies which introduce a negative icon. And oh, a side team comes out with an amplify icon. Maybe I'll just leave it there to power up my stats a little bit more with laser swords. You can also sneak in a copy of Live Dangerously, the 0 cost player side team in pool. And once laser swords is down, when Live Dangerously comes around, slap it down, boom, immediately you've got that +4 damage. And hopefully you can win before the negative icons get you, or you just survive one turn with them, and then again, you've got +4 attack. Hopefully you can close out the game. Before we move on from pool, I just want to shout out how good it is to use the negative icon kind of stuff if you have multiple pool characters on the table. This does require at least someone else at the table to also have bought the pool aspect, so you've got enough cards to do this effectively and use all the stuff that benefits from bad icons. Or if you're crazy enough like me, and I have been a content creator for the game, it's not exactly normal, but I do have 2 copies of the Deadpool pack, just so in 2-player, which is my most common player count, we can do this and it's really, really fun. You're suffering the negative in exactly the same way as if one person was in pool with all the bad stuff, and the potential of the Dread pool encounter set as well, but you're both getting the benefit. Up next, we're just going to end on just a couple of simple basic concepts. Now, the basic cards do have a few different packages like Psionic, Mystic, and so on, and I'm not really going to cover that there. I don't think that's an archetype. It is kind of a side synergy, but if you have the relevant trait, generally throw some of that stuff in, and it's going to help you out. But I'm going to get a little bit more specific. Up first is what I'm calling a team support kind of archetype. Now, this isn't strictly even tied to basic, but you'll generally incorporate some basic elements to help it out, no matter what aspect you have chosen. So this is kind of multiplayer only, but effectively Avengers Mansion, Heavy Carrier, core set cards that can target any player, really helpful in a team. But there are a bunch of upgrades and things in the game that you can play on other players. Endurance is one of them, handing out health is always convenient, but this is really a stand-in for anything you want to do in any of the aspects. If you're running a leadership deck and you're aiming to be more of a support role to help out the table, you can bring 3 copies of Clarity of Purpose, and you can play those on other players to help them out. If you're in Justice, we've already actually covered playing skilled investigators on other players at the table, but you can also do that with Float Like a Butterfly, and in fact, a lot of the time, if you're bringing Float Like a Butterfly in Justice in multiplayer, it is better to just give it to your aggression or leadership player, who have more characters or have more attacks that are going to benefit from more damage, and does get more triggers from Float Like a Butterfly. And lastly, I think Mutant Education is such a powerful tool for certain decks, for certain heroes, specifically mutant heroes. I really thought it was worth a shout here. This is a card which is a 0-cost event, Ultra Ego only action. Choose up to 2 identity-specific cards in your discard pile and shuffle them into your deck. If Expansion is in play, draw a card. So this is a 0-cost card, so you play it, boom, 2 cards that were in your discard pile, back in your deck. That's not bad, honestly. On some characters, that can be quite a good deal. Some characters which have especially good identity-specific cards, this can be really, really powerful for. If you have Expansion, you get to replace Mutant Education in your hand. So there's kind of no immediate loss of tempo, no losing any money or anything like that, and you still get the cards shuffled back into your deck. You can just take 1 copy of Mutant Education just to get some essential stuff back into your deck, or you can build into 3 of them. You can run X-Mansion, and you can even run Mutant Education's kind of sister card, X-Men Instruction, to shuffle allies back into your deck. While it can clog up your hand a bit, if X-Mansion is down, they will at least replace themselves when you play them, potentially with one of the cards you've shuffled back in. And the smaller your deck is, the higher the chance to get something sooner that you've put back into the deck, so it gets more powerful as you go through your deck pass, and it also has, more targets in your discard pile, which also lets you get the better cards. And that about does it. I think we've gone through a ton of stuff in aggression, justice, protection, leadership, pool. Hopefully it's given you guys some really good deck building ideas. Maybe some of you didn't realize, oh, this card could interact with this card in that way. And sometimes it's just hard to keep track of everything in this game after so many years. So hopefully it's been kind of a fun refresher for a lot of other people to see what the game can do. Again, kind of like I said at the beginning, this is just my take on the archetypes. There is no official list by the designers or community consensus of the exact archetypes that exist in the game. I'm going to have classified some things differently to other content creators, other players. Maybe I've got my own names for a couple of different things that I'm just not aware of or don't like what other people are using. But it's safe to say that after so many years of Marvel Champions, there are an absolute ton of things you can do. Historically, I never used to like protection. I don't particularly enjoy playing defensive kind of protection, but it had so many other ways to play it and so many what I'm calling side synergies that no matter what hero I'm playing, there's almost always a fun way to do it without heavily going into the defense stuff. On a similar note, leadership has forever had a bit of a bad reputation with some people. But as the longest section in this video by far, hopefully I've demonstrated that it has a lot of depth and tons of different things you can do with it, as opposed to some of the more simple, straightforward strategies. Thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed making this. This is a video that I've, sort of videos, I suppose, all combined into one, that I've been meaning to do for such a long time. I've got a couple of big videos still to go and the campaign contest results, so stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.